Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me, as always, Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cam?
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Hey, what's going on? And returning from sabbatical / also London, Logan Wilkinson. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a pleasure to be back.
How was England, merry old UK?
It's pretty great. I it was actually my first time leaving North America.
Yeah, that's right.
I obviously had taken a road trip back when I was 25 with Brandon, who you both have met, so that's the easy reference now. We did a road trip when we were 25 out to Canada, and then last year for me and Travis' honeymoon, we went to Canada, a different part as well. But aside from that, I'd never even left America, so it was my first transatlantic flight. We were lucky because we had a nonstop flight. It was like 10 and a half hours, which really wasn't bad at all. And then London was incredible. I think it's my new favorite city I've ever been to. I really love London. Super walkable, very livable in terms of just like having stuff around everywhere.
Sure.
We did a dinner at a Michelin-starred Gordon Ramsay restaurant. Me and Travis are both big Gordon Ramsay fans, so that was really cool. We went to a lot of really good restaurants. Kiln is one, Cricket's another. We went to the British Museum, which is really incredible. Kind of walked by the National Gallery. We were really lucky because our hotel was like smack in the middle of the city center. Because British Airways had a good deal if you booked your hotel and flight together, so we did that. We had a guided tour of Parliament. That was really cool. That's probably my highlight. So it was a really great trip. It was a really great way to kind of unwind after, another semester of
Hitting your halfway point of law
hitting
school.
the halfway point of law school. So it was a good way to celebrate, good way to kind of allow the brain to relax and rest, and then just spend a lot of the holidays in the Bay outside of that at Trevor's parents' house that Trevor's been to. And yeah, just had a great time. So nice. I recommend London.
Yeah, I went when I graduated high school. We went to like a bunch of people went to Europe for like 3 weeks.
Yes, story.
And England was like probably the bulk of that was like a week in London, or in the UK. And I remember just for the duration of that trip, I'm sure we didn't do like any kind of Michelin star meals, but like I remember distinctly every dinner we had some form of potatoes for the entire trip. Whether it was mashed, baked,
I don't know
fried.
why I said yep. I've never been. So
It was just like that was ingrained in our meals. But yeah, it was certainly great food all around. It was fascinating. I was telling my mom this recently. Like I remember going there and having to be the dumb American and like ask for ice in sodas and stuff like that.
Right.
And thinking to me now, who like has for the last 15 years probably been like, no ice in my soda at like a fast food restaurant because I just want more soda and it comes out cold enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, just thinking about like the silly differences there. But yeah,
it's really
Europe was such a great time.
London's really funny because to me it's a little bit like New York, I think, where I feel like so often if you go to New York when you're in like your 20s or beyond and you've just been exposed to so much of that city through like pop culture, like osmosis, or like through playing the Marvel Spider-Man game, right? Like you're suddenly like, oh, I actually know this city pretty well, like the layout of actually like Manhattan kind of area. And there's a similar dynamic at play in London, which is maybe the second most pop culturally resonant city in the world after New York, right? Where it's just sort of like, oh, I actually know the layout of this area surprisingly well from, 60 years worth of James Bond movies and all the kind of different Doctor Who stuff that we've seen, right? And it was kind of funny to be like, oh, like, I know David Tennant was just right there, and like that kind of thing. And there was a lot of like Leonardo DiCaprio like pointing at the TV while in London. That was a really cool experience.
The Eye, for example. Yeah,
we were literally our hotel was across the Thames from the Eye. You could see it from our hotel. Yeah.
Nice. I remember, yeah. So I was there in 2003 was when I graduated high school, and I had I have a picture of like a handful of my friends that were on the trip with me, us on the Millennium Bridge.
Yeah.
Because we had like one of my friends had like a local that they knew, and so one of the evenings when we were like free to just kind of be on our own, like we had him give us like the real walking tour of London and stuff like that. And that was, it was just a really cool, fun memories and stuff. And it's definitely like I would love to go back and just have been able to make it work. But
that was the other thing
someday.
we talked about, just like we immediately started a list of like the things we hadn't even been able to do that we want to go back for like a second trip of London, because we both loved it so much, right? And I do think it's a city like New York or like San Francisco that just kind of has its own kind of charm and magic to it, I think, right? Or like Paris. People say about Paris too, but I haven't been, right? It's like just one of those special cities.
Yep, indeed. All right, well, cool catching up. But that's not why we're here today. We're here today for our Movie of the Year podcast, as kind of the companion to last week's Game of the Year podcast. And this will be an interesting one because whereas Cameron and I were very focused on games and stuff last year, movies not so much. But Logan was super into the movie scene last year.
That's true.
So yeah, we're gonna dive in and chat about our top movies of 2024. As with the Game of the Year stuff last week, we'll kind of start with our honorable mentions, and then we'll dive into our number 10s, our number 9s, our number 8s, and so on and so forth. Every movie in the top 10 will kind of earn points. 1 point for a number 10 movie, 2 points for a number 9, so on and so forth, until 10 points for a number 1 movie. And at the end, we will have our results all kind of tallied together to come up with that nerdy site's
Movie
top 10
of the
movies
year
of 2024.
What was Game of the Year?
Game of the Year
Final
was
Fantasy
Final
VII
Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
A Rebirth, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Astrobot was number 2.
Yeah, hell yeah, it was,
and,
boys.
Metaphor Refantasio was number 3.
Yep.
And there was like 1 point difference between those 3 games.
Love it. I love the eclectic nature of that list too.
Yeah. It ended up being an interesting list because of Cameron's job situation. There was a good chunk that was like, Cameron's list is the games that he was able to borrow off of me or get like cheap or free on Game Pass or something like that.
Right.
Game Pass, anything where it was like any free game. Like one of my games only made it to the top. Like I was only able to play it because like friends bought it for me on Steam, and so it's like cool, I can play it. And so that was a thing. It was it was definitely a challenging year. 2024, very challenging year.
Also, why Cameron hasn't seen a lot of movies
Yep,
last year.
100%. It's like
sure.
Trevor's like, I'm going to go see this movie. And I'm like, I'm not working right now. And I don't feel I can personally justify going out to see a movie.
Yeah.
So I can barely justify the like depression induced, like needing to eat fast food. Like that's barely acceptable to me at this point. So movies were definitely not on that choppy, on the docket there.
Yep. But we do have some to chat through, so we will, without further ado, let's dive into some of our honorable mentions. And I will kick things off myself with an honorable mention. Saturday Night. Oh, and also we'll do the thing where we always do, like, if somebody else has the movie higher on their list, we'll wait to discuss it when it's basically, like, the highest on the list. So, yeah, Saturday Night was one of my honorable mentions. Does it make anywhere on your list there, Logan?
It is not on my list. It is on my watch list. It's a movie that I wanted to see and I just couldn't get around to seeing it in theaters, and then it hasn't come out on, like, streaming anywhere else yet.
Yeah. It just misses my top 10. It was probably my number 11 of the year. I like, as a lifelong fan of Saturday Night Live and like the storied history of this show, it was really interesting to kind of go back and get that, like, you know, pseudo peek behind the curtain for this. The biggest gripe I had with this movie that I talked about when I talked about it on the podcast was they locked themselves into a format for the movie of it's the 90 minutes before air of that first episode, and in locking it into that kind of confined time frame, they're trying to do too much in too short a time span. They're introducing like 30 different characters, and while it's really like a story about Gabrielle LaBelle's Lorne Michaels kind of, and the stress he was going through in that, hour and a half. It gives time to the original cast and some of the writers, and you've got, bigwig executives and stuff that are there,
Right.
hoping it's going to fail and whatnot. And so it's trying to juggle too many things. And it ends up giving a lot of the cast and just little beats short shrift. So I think if it had been maybe broken out as like a 2-hour movie, and like 1 hour is, the weeks leading up to it, and then 1 hour is an hour till showtime or something like that, maybe that would have worked. But by doing it all within like the 90 minutes before air, it just didn't hit for me as well as I would have liked. Still some fun stuff in there, and some great performances, but yeah, just I think all of that kind of led it to kind of just miss my overall top 10 stuff. So those are my thoughts on Saturday Night. Cameron, who only has a top 10 list, has no honorable mentions for us. So I'm going to throw it to you, Logan, for one of your honorable mentions.
Yeah, I also should preface this by saying, like Trevor said, I didn't play very many video games last year. I focused on movies, which is my kind of favorite storytelling medium, and also just shorter than video games.
It's what you have time for in law school.
And so I made a big goal of watching 100 movies for the year, different movies from all different decades or whatever. I ended the year with 126. Maybe I'll be on next week's That Nerdy Side Show talking about that journey. So yeah, it was a really exciting, interesting journey to kind of trace back. I watched movies over like a 125-year period of time. And so it was fun to like go from like 1950 to then jump back to 2024 and watch something. My honorable mentions is a really weird combination. So one movie that is not an honorable mention because it is admittedly not good, but that I think gets more hate than it deserves is Borderlands. So Borderlands is not in my top 10. It's not even in my top 15. It's barely in my top 20 favorite movies from 2024. I have it at 19 on my list, but I don't know. I think the thing about Borderlands to me is that it's dumb. It is a dumb, stupid, silly movie. But I think if you understand that concept and enjoy it for the ride it takes you on, there is a fair amount of joy to be had in Borderlands. And I don't know. I think when I look back and it's been like a 1.4 on Letterboxd with that, it's like, it's not that bad of a movie. It's not. I don't find it like offensively terrible. An actual movie that I'll give a shout out to on my, almost made the cut for top 10 is going to be Argylle.
Okay.
So Argylle is it ahead of that on your list, Trevor?
No, I did not watch it.
Okay, so Argylle is Matthew Vaughn's newest movie from the Kingsman series, starring Henry Cavill, ostensibly, but actually not starring Henry Cavill. I think Argylle's a really cool idea. It's very stylized, which is very much Matthew Vaughn's kind of forte at this point with everything in Kingsman and Kick-Ass. Very stylized, kind of very like hyper realistic, very colorful. I think the issues with Argylle are sort of two major problems. Of one, it was marketed in a way that is not the actual movie, where Henry Cavill is front and center. It is Henry Cavill leading a spy film. Henry Cavill is a spy. It is Henry Cavill's James Bond audition tape. It is Henry Cavill, Henry Cavill, Henry Cavill. In the opening credits, Henry Cavill's name's first on all the posters. Henry Cavill's smack in the middle, right, of everything. But the problem is that Henry Cavill is not the main character of Argylle. The problem is that Henry Cavill probably gets 10 minutes of screen time total in the movie. And in fact, this is not a spoiler. This is very much revealed in the first 5 minutes of the movie. Henry Cavill is the character Argylle that Bryce Dallas Howard's character created in these series of spy novels. And Bryce Dallas Howard's author is in fact the real main character. And it sort of annoys me because she's great. And this idea of I'm a author of a like mystery spy series, and the events that I write about are actually true, without me even realizing it, right? And then I need to like finish writing this book to figure out what is going to happen next in the thing, and it gets into this whole like cat and mouse game between her and like Bryan Cranston and Sam Rockwell, and Catherine O'Hara's in the movie, right? And all these different characters kind of competing against one another to kind of find out what is going to happen, for the kind of MacGuffin at the heart of the film, is a really cool idea, right? And I think a really original idea, and it's sort of, I think, not given the, I don't know, banner treatment it should have been given. And so they're like, Henry Cavill, people like him, people like think he should be the next Bond, let's make that the focus. And then the second big issue with the movie, which I sort of alluded to, is that also in pretty classic Matthew Vaughn fashion, there are a lot of twists and turns and red herrings, and I think they suck a lot of the momentum out of the film. In particular, like the big reveal that kind of leads into the third act really doesn't work for me. I think it's just like really kind of clumsy, and they're trying to, if anything, the best analogy I can give is it feels like they had this idea for the twist ending and then crafted the rest of the movie that actually sort of ended up going in a different, I think, better direction. But they feel like they had to go back to that twist in a way that is reminiscent to me of How I Met Your Mother, where it's like they had this twist and then they were like, the show naturally happened and it ended up being better than the twist was. But they were like, we have to do the twist still. And they didn't in Argyle, and the twist ends up sucking, I think. And we have like this like unnecessary like romance element introduced, and the finale fight sequence in particular is like super hyper stylized, and like very silly looking and very CGI in like all of the worst ways for all of those things. So it sort of sucks a lot of the tension out of it. But everything up until kind of that last big twist is like a really engaging, fun kind of mystery of what's happening. How does Bryce Dallas Howard's characters know all of this stuff? Who are these characters around her? Who can she trust? Who can't she trust? There's a lot of double crossing and triple crossing here. And it's really engaging. Matthew Vaughn is a good director and writer for kind of snappy dialogue, and that stays true here. But I think it's just sort of undercut by its inability to sort of get out of its own way, by its kind of reliance on mostly not great CGI, and by its, refusal to not just stick with this twist ending that it didn't need.
Yeah. Peek behind the curtain, I think Cameron's laugh was largely influenced by the fact that I had told him right before we started recording that I've been rewatching How I Met Your Mother, because I apart from the bad twist of the last season, like I really enjoyed that show. Mm-hmm. And even the last season, I hate the framework of the last season of like, oh, it's all over the wedding weekend kind of thing. I agree. But I love the mother so much that like it remedies the last season. And so just kind of going back and like revisiting, especially like early, as somebody who before How I Met Your Mother was a fan of the British show Coupling by Stephen Moffat. Like it does a lot of similar things of like, we're going to play with like an unreliable narrator, or we're going to have like little gimmicks in our multicam sitcom show to like have funny things to do. So, but the knowing the little bit that I knew about Argyle, I'd heard kind of the same things of like, the twist feels like it was the twist for twist's sake, and then the movie doesn't really support the twist anymore.
Which is funny, because I think Matthew Vaughn's best movies are done when there aren't big twists.
I would agree.
I think that he does his best work when it's like his swerves work best when he telegraphs them in the subtle ways that he does. I think one of my favorite movies that he did recently was I'm trying to remember what it was called. Actually, I take that back. That's Guy Ritchie who did that film. I take that back. Anyway, Matthew Vaughn stuff usually like it just works best if it's just a straightforward storytelling narrative. This skill and strength of Matthew Vaughn is in his style.
Yes.
It's why you go to see his movies. It's not because of complex storytelling. It's because you want the visual feast that is his unique way of looking through a camera lens.
Right. I mean, I think even with something like the original Kingsman, I think all of that is there, right? And even that movie, which arguably has, a big twist with obviously Colin Firth's character dying in that movie, right, getting killed. It feels less like a giant, big twist and more like anything can happen in this world, right? Like there are sort of no rules, no characters safe. And that is not the case in Argyle, unfortunately. And the way that he does a post-credits stinger, and he's trying to build a Matthew Vaughn cinematic universe. None of it really works. It's all just kind of what are we doing here? And it's a shame because it is so fun to look at for so much of it, if nothing else.
Yeah. All right. Back to me for another honorable mention. I think this will probably be my last honorable mention because looking at my honorable mentions, I'm pretty sure all the rest of them are just on Cameron's list, so I won't bother going through those until we talk about them in the top tens. But if you have a few more, feel free to jump in. But my last honorable mention, and probably one of the last movies I actually watched of the year, just threw it on to HBO Max. Was Beetlejuice.
Ooh, I'm also going to give that an honorable mention. So that's perfect.
It was fine. It is of my overall list of 14, 15, whatever movies, probably the bottom of the list in terms of it wasn't overly offensive, but it was also one of those I don't think this needed to exist. It did a good job in that it has the right amount of Michael Keaton, but I think it also has just stories that kind of don't go anywhere or
that's what I'm gonna get
aren't
into.
particularly needed in the film. Some fun performances, Willem Dafoe is a lot of fun, even in a this is a complete. You could take this role out of the movie and it's not really gonna be detrimental to the movie. And Jenna Ortega, a natural successor for the Winona Ryder vibes of the original, certainly. You mentioned Catherine O'Hara in Argyle. Obviously, she's continues to just knock it out of the park in everything she does, and is fun in this, reprising her role. We talked about, or at least I talked about it at some point with Cameron. The way they write out the dad character, pseudo problematic anyway, or not pseudo problematic as an actor anyway. Interesting in concept, overdone in execution. Where if it had been the opening little claymation thing of oh, he died and he died off screen and we're dealing with that, cool. But then we routinely revisit him in the underworld, also, and he's just there.
His character still gets a happy ending, ostensibly, right? Being so it's weird that everything.
Well, it's the character wasn't the problem. The character wasn't problematic in the first film. The character's good, but the problem is the actor. So how do you write out the actor without necessarily writing out the character? I guess. And that was their solution. I thought it was I've heard about it, and I'm that's a really interesting way and creative way of doing that, but from what Trevor told me from the film, it's way overdone.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, the way they kind of hand wave away why Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis aren't in the movie is that's weird. But okay, sure. So yeah, it was interesting and certainly as somebody who very often is not a huge fan of the Tim Burton aesthetic. This one didn't bother me as much as a lot of his Johnny Depp collaboration things do. But it was also okay, this felt like they had 3 or 4 ideas, but none of them were feature length. And so they just kind of stitched them all together, much like Monica Bellucci's character in the film, or stapled her together, I guess. So yeah, it was fine, but it was one that I just kind of threw on. And was okay, I wasn't really missing anything by not seeing this in theaters. Anything to add there, Logan?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be one of the big ones I was going to talk about too. I like it maybe marginally more than Trevor. It seems pretty close. We have a lot of the same frustrations. One of my biggest issues, just to start off with the things I don't like, one of my biggest issues with Beetlejuice is there is no overarching villain in this movie. There's just no central villain, right? Because it's like this weird hodgepodge of like, Monica Bellucci's character is ostensibly supposed to be that, but she's in this thing so little that like you just forget she exists at times, right? And then there's like,
and she is only a villain to Beetlejuice.
Yes, exactly.
None of the other characters give a crap about her or anything. Like she definitely racks up a body count in the film, but it's like
it doesn't affect anyone else, right? And then it's like, oh, maybe it's like Justin Theroux's character, but like even he's like less a villain and more just kind of like a shitty person, and like the stakes don't feel very high there. So then it's like, oh, the villain is, mild spoilers, like the kid that's with Jenna Ortega, but they like dispatch him like by the beginning of the third act, and then there's just like, no, what are we doing here, right? So like there's no real overarching villain, and they have these like three possibilities and like sort of don't invest in any of them, which feeds into my other biggest issue of the movie that Trevor touched on really well, which is that there are a lot of characters who are doing not a lot of things. They're just sort of around, like hovering around here. And like Willem Dafoe is a great example because Willem Dafoe is great in this thing, but he's also not needed in any way. He's just sort of there. Like he's almost like he makes the one introduction with Beetlejuice early on, and then outside of that he's just sort of doing his own thing for most of the movie, not talking to any of the major characters until the end of the thing again. Like he just sort of exists outside of them all.
When I was telling it to Cameron, I called out the fact that, and minor spoilers for the film, but like when he finally comes back in like the third act, like he is they literally say freeze and he's frozen, and basically like they sideline him for like the climax of the movie because of how unimportant and unnecessary he was. He's there, but he's there off camera basically.
And it's really weird because like I think there are parts of this movie that work really well, right? Like Catherine O'Hara obviously is phenomenal. Jenna Ortega I think is great. I like Winona Ryder in this thing, and then Michael Keaton obviously is just so clearly having a ball to be Beetlejuice. But Beetlejuice 2 is, I don't know, like it does this thing where Beetlejuice is the bad guy in Beetlejuice 1. Like there's like some murkiness to it. Like he's like kind of more just like an anarchist who's just kind of out to destroy everything and less targeting these people, but like he's not good. And like in this movie, it's it's Beetlejuice's anti-hero story, and it's like they get into this problem because then Beetlejuice himself is sort of a bad guy to Winona Ryder's character, but not really. And so like he himself,
he's a traumatic monster is what he is to her. And so it's like, it doesn't make sense to have him do like a face turn.
It becomes this weird thing where like he does like half a face turn where like he's sort of totally fine to everyone else but Winona Ryder's character. And even that is like, he loves her ? And like, it's unclear. And like Beetlejuice arguably gets one of the, kind of most vicious endings. Like his ending's really negative in a lot of ways, but he doesn't seem like he's the worst of all the sensible bad guy type characters because they don't know what to do with him really, right? And so it's like this weird thing of like this movie had I think a somewhat well thought out like first 2 acts, and then just had so clearly no idea how to bring all the trains into the station, right? They didn't know what to do with any of these characters or plot lines, and so like the last act is very messy. It's very silly, even by an already silly movie standard. Hence the Michael Keaton like dance musical number at the climax, right? Like they don't know how to wrap up any of the storylines, and so they just sort of like freeze characters over here, magic away Monica Bellucci, have the main guy who's been messing around with Jenna Ortega like drop through the floor. Like they just kind of get rid of everyone and make it like Beetlejuice is the villain we're trying to get rid of here again. But he's also not a villain, but he also is, and he's not. And it's like this weird thing of like, they can't commit to how they want to treat their main character or any of the villains. And so it becomes this weird thing, a little bit like Argyle, I think, where its last act just sort of completely falls apart. Having said that, I love a lot of it feels like Tim Burton coming back to his roots. This movie is very practical effects heavy, and it looks great for that reason. It is so good to look at. There's some really excellent miniature work in this movie that I think is really, really great. I think the Danny Elfman soundtrack and score is really lovely and beautiful, and like has like really great kind of homages and references to the original movie while doing new things. Jenna Ortega has like pretty seamlessly slipped into both Winona Ryder's shoes and like Jamie Lee Curtis's shoes as like a modern day scream queen, and she's great in this. And in a lot of ways, I just kind of keep wanting to have more of Jenna Ortega in this thing, right? Like the movie is so split in so many directions that we don't get as much of her as I would have liked. But yeah, I don't know. I think the movie has a lot of interesting ideas. I definitely don't think it's a failure. It's almost more, it was like just good enough to have me be disappointed that it wasn't fully great kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Let's move on to your next honorable mention there, Logan.
The other one is one that might be on one or both of your top 10s, which I'm prepared for, which would be Gladiator 2.
Did not see it.
Yeah.
Neither one we saw it. Okay, great. So perfect. Okay. Yep. So Gladiator 2, I can make this quick. It just missed out of my top 10. In a recurring theme of my honorable mentions, I think its last act really lets it down. I also think that Gladiator 2 is let down by, I don't know how to phrase this other than just Paul Mescal, who I love, Irish representation, is just not Russell Crowe. And he is just not, he just does not have the same ability to command your attention as Russell Crowe does in the first Gladiator movie. And indeed, Paul Mescal also has the great misfortune of being up against Denzel Washington, who in every single scene he's in Gladiator 2 is so riveting, right? Like, in a lot of ways...
I love that people were complaining about him with him having his New York accent, and then be like...
Yeah.
And then like, wait a minute, you do know Romans didn't have British accents, right?
Well, to me, it's most reminiscent of Sean Connery in The Hunt for Red October, where he's ostensibly playing a Russian, but just has a Scottish accent. And it's like, yeah, Denzel Washington and Sean Connery are big enough, especially at that point in their respective careers, they can do whatever the hell they want. And guess what? Mm-hmm. Denzel Washington's phenomenal in this. Like especially as the movie goes on, gets more and more time, and like his behind the scenes machinations and very Game of Thrones plot, and to set up all these pieces up, and his backstory and why he wants to do what he is doing is riveting. I love all of the behind the scenes like politics nature of Gladiator 2 that is like much more prominent than in Gladiator 1 and fits with this kind of time period in Rome as things are kind of spinning out of control. It's excellent. Denzel's excellent in this. He is
well, Denzel's up against the syphilitic emperors, right?
Yeah, and he has so much fun with it, and he's so much fun with Paul Mescal. His character, what I like about him is that he is an actually great anti-hero, right? Where like he is doing good things and bad things. He is being both malevolent and also like a hero to lots of people, and he is a true like three-dimensional, multifaceted character in a way that sort of no one else in the entire cast is. It is sort of the reverse of what me and Trevor usually say of like, he knew exactly what movie he was in, and Denzel Washington sort of doesn't know what movie he's in. He's acted in like a Shakespeare production, and everyone else is in Gladiator 2, having just like fun with the swords and sand, but it works. Denzel Washington is phenomenal in this thing. It is one of my favorite performances of the entire year. It's just, he's not the main character. He's not even like arguably like the second or third most important character. That's the problem. He's just like chewing up scenery and like demolishing through everyone else and becoming this like force of nature throughout the movie, but it's not his movie. And while I like Paul Mescal a lot, I just think he is sort of outmatched throughout this thing. And Paul Mescal to me is an actor who's great in something like After Sun, which is kind of like quieter drama. And I think he's sort of swallowed up by the kind of scale of Gladiator 2 to me in a way that Russell Crowe isn't. And I also think the way that this movie tries to tie itself to Gladiator 1 repeatedly fails for me. It doesn't make that connection really work. And its ending is really silly. It becomes, the best way I can describe it without spoiling it is it basically becomes how Quentin Tarantino treats history movies, which is Ridley Scott does whatever the fuck he wants about how Rome in history actually works at the end. And it's really silly, and it doesn't work for me because they almost had it. They were so close to like doing a really cool, like darker ending that would have actually fit with this period of Roman history. And he doesn't commit to it, and he makes it like a happily ever after ending. And I hate to break it to Ridley Scott, but the Roman Empire is not still kicking. But nonetheless, Gladiator 2 has these moments of really epic scale. Pedro Pascal is great, like usual. But it just misses out of my top 10.
All right. Any other honorable mentions you want to give some love to before we hop into top 10s?
No, nothing else. I mean, I can say, like, I'll give, I guess, like a 30-second thing for Unfrosted, the Jerry Seinfeld directed movie about the making of Pop-Tarts. If only because it's not a movie at all. It is instead just a series of skits, basically. The connective tissue is so flimsy. It's not even in my top 15 for the year. But if you view it as like, this is a 90-minute long series of skits, some of which are very funny, some of which are very much not funny. And they take very much a, like, we're going to just throw everything at the wall approach to it. But it was at least one of the more interest in movies because of that, and like the way that it very much feels like they were just sort of like, they had basically no script and were just improvising everything every day, which is also, I think, why it works either really well or not at all, depending on the caliber of comedians around Jerry Seinfeld on that given day. But there's some fun in that one, and I like Jerry Seinfeld, and so I'll give a shout out to that. But otherwise, no.
All right. Then we will dive into our top 10s. And since you've had to sit on the sidelines here a little bit, Cam, I'm going to throw it to you first. What was your number 10 movie of the year?
My number 10, Challengers.
Ooh. Challengers, okay. Is that anywhere in your list, Logan?
No, it was one of the movies I tried to watch this week, but I didn't get time to it. So yeah, let me know how it is, Cam.
All right, hit us.
For sure. So Challengers is a messy, hot, just like sexy, just tour de force of a movie that for a couple hours that is just basically it's the story of two rival tennis players who are best friends but also the greatest rivals, and you would be like, oh, and it's how a woman played by Zendaya, who's phenomenal in the film, she carries that movie through so many parts. And it's a story about like, how this woman gets in between them? It's like, no, it's kind of how this woman like really brings them together, and that really messes things up. To a just like one of the key plot points, or like not key plot points, but like a kind of like something that's lampshaded a little bit, and kind of like is like a kind of like a thing that, or not lampshaded, I guess, something they come back to later.
Foreshadowing.
Thank you. Foreshadowing. I'm always saying lampshading instead of foreshadowing.
Yeah, it's always. You just learned that term wrong, I guess.
I did. And it's just kind of like left there as like oh, hey, this thing, and it regards whether or not one of the players slept with Zendaya's character. And it comes back at the end in like and you're like, oh no, is this going to be like super messed up? And it's not. And it's just kind of like this understanding that there is a very difficult and somewhat it's not toxic isn't the right word, but it's very much like this complex thing, like relationship going on, because in reality these two men probably want to have sex with each other, but they are too heteronormative to accept that. And so Zendaya is this way that they get to essentially establish their own interpersonal romance / rivalry with her. And it's a really hot and messy way they go about it, where it really puts it up like this is a movie about how she chose one guy, but at the end she sleeps with the other guy, and it's this whole thing. And it's like, it's not. This is about three people who have a very complex romantic and sexual relationship that they don't know how to navigate, and this is the mess of it. It's phenomenal in a lot of ways, but it does leave a lot to be desired for like greater plot like purposes. It's completely character driven. And it's kind of like, there's also moments where you're like, oh, like I'm just disappointed in some of you. And but does have an ending that I just didn't expect to see coming. And it kind of nails the kind of spirit of the film itself, which is letting go of ego, and like the entire idea of like being able to love somebody is to be able to let go of your ego. And what happens when also people lose their drive and passion. And how that makes them like less attractive in a lot of ways, especially in like competitive sports areas. It gets like very emotional. I watched the beginning of this year, so a lot of stuff is a little bit fuzzy for me as far as like specific plot details. But overall, it was a movie that I think back and I'm like I had a good time watching it. It was a fun time watching it. It was fun to see kind of like this like it did get very like pop culture buzzed for its threesome scene. But there is a lot of like homoerotic tension between the two male leads that is like, it's very much like all these problems that everybody has, these three people have, could have been solved if the two guys just had sex with each other. And just like dealt with that in their personal relationship, because they're men, they're championship tennis players, they're athletes, they can't do that. They can't be that. And so this is how Zendaya's character ends up getting in between, like involved with the two of them, and how it evolves throughout that. So yeah, like it's a really good film, extremely well shot, well, like great acting in it, but overall just like caliber of film on the lower end.
All right. Yeah, shout out to Zendaya completing the hat trick of Spider-Man love interests playing tennis people in movies with that film.
Wait, when did Emma Stone do tennis?
She played I don't remember what the film was, but she played Billy something.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. She was it's Battle of the Sexes, what the movie is.
There you go.
And it's about the historic match between Billy McEnroe versus somebody, the gal that she played.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I don't know McEnroe because he's a tennis player. I know him because he showed up in a lot of Adam Sandler picks in the 2000s.
Sure.
That's how I know him.
John McEnroe, yeah.
John McEnroe, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to slot over to I don't know. Logan had to step away. I don't know when he'll be back. I hear a door closing, and so presumably he's back. You there, Logan?
Yes.
Welcome back. Okay. So we just wrapped up with Cameron's pick there for challengers. Do you want to go with your number 10 next, or do you have anything to add on challengers?
I was just going to say on challengers too. I'd be really curious, Cameron, if that director had a movie come out in December called Queer, starring Daniel Craig, that I really want to watch. That I think if you liked his style on challengers, I think you'd really like his kind of his visual style and his storytelling techniques. And his exploration of just sort of like LGBTQ themes is very pronounced in Queer as well, and it's got like some early award season buzz for Daniel Craig's performance in it. I think
cool, yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Well. I mean,
yeah.
I love Daniel Craig. I've loved Daniel Craig since Layer Cake. So.
Yeah. So I'd recommend that as well. I want to see it as well. So otherwise, Trevor, I have no other thoughts on challengers, so we can.
All right. Do you want to hit us with your number 10 then?
Oh yes. I can go next. My number 10, put my letterbox list, is it is Red One, Christmas movie.
Okay.
I actually want to see this when it gets to Netflix.
Is this on anyone else's list?
Oh, it's on Netflix? I gotta watch
it. No, it's not on anybody else's list. It's an Amazon Prime movie.
It's on Amazon Prime.
Oh, it's Amazon Prime. I thought it was Netflix. No, it's fine. I'll watch it on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, and it's already there, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Basically, it was like only in theaters to make a little bit of money. But yeah, it's been in the Amazon Prime queue for a while now.
So my thing on Red One is pretty simple. I don't get the hate for it at all. I think it's genuinely such a really fun, silly time. I think it is a good movie that also has like the necessary level of like Christmas, like pathos and emotion to it. I also am someone who really loves when a Christmas movie gets into like the lore and mythology of like Santa Claus and the North Pole, and this one does a ton of stuff on like that mythology and lore to it.
You don't say. Okay,
so
I'm so in at this point.
Yeah, like I don't know. I think in a lot of ways, like I even put this in my letterbox review that I was looking at right now. It's like in a lot of ways, I think it's incorporation of the various holiday themed mythological elements. Honestly, reminds me of Percy Jackson a little bit. Like not with like the same level of like skill, but like in terms of like how they incorporate it into it. It is like Percy Jackson adjacent, and I am a huge Percy Jackson fan, as I know Cameron is as well. And so I don't know. I think it is something to me that really works. I'm fairly hit or miss generally on The Rock as a performer in films. But I think he's lucky enough to be in a movie that basically wants him to be The Rock. And so he does that good enough. I think Chris Evans is someone who is honestly is charming enough to be in like the worst movie. And this is not that. I think he actually has really good chemistry with The Rock, and I think their bromance is sort of the core of the movie in a lot of ways. But I also think that Chris Evans stuff with like his son, his character's son, and his former like ex-wife is really well done. I don't know. I just think, you know, this movie got like really shed on, a lot of hate, and I think it's pretty good actually, right? Like it's not to me in the top tier of Christmas movies of, you know, A Christmas Story, Elf, Home Alone, The Year Without a Santa Claus, but like it is very much in like that second tier of Christmas movies for me. I think like it is definitely a movie that like me and Travia both walked out of and were like, yeah, we would definitely watch that again during ABC's 25 Days of Christmas marathon next year, right? Like it's a fun, engaging, like action adventure Christmas movie, which is not really a genre that exists very much, but it does it really well. I like its mythology. I like its lore. And the last kind of two things I would say is that the movie is actually genuinely funny, and like really funny in certain parts. And the Krampus character in the movie is excellent. And his dynamic with the cast around him, his dynamic with Santa Claus is really, really great. And then that leads nicely into the last thing I would say, which is just that J.K. Simmons as Santa Claus feels like such a no-brainer in hindsight. Like, he's so good as Santa.
He's so hot and ripped. It's crazy.
And like he's just like such a perfect like Santa Claus personality that like I don't know, it works really well. I like their version of Santa. I like their version of the North Pole. And I like its last act, which is unique among the movies I've talked about so far in this podcast. And so, yeah, I really liked Red One. You know, it is going to be number 10 on my list here. But I could probably make a somewhat compelling argument that I could have it as high as like 7th or 8th on my top 10 list, depending on when you ask me. It's a ton of fun.
Interesting. Yeah. Like seeing Red One and the trailers and stuff like that. It was like, I feel like I know exactly what that movie is from the trailers.
That's what I thought too. I thought it was going to be like a dumb fun Christmas movie, but it's more actually.
Yeah. Like having seen like the Red Notices of the world and those just kind of like made directly for streaming, The Rock paired up with a funny, you know, sarcastic, quipping kind of character. It's like, okay, yeah, just copy and paste that formula and throw a holiday coat of paint on it. I know exactly what I would get going into that movie, and I just wasn't really in the vibe for that. But I'm glad to hear it worked for you, and yeah, and to your point of like The Rock is being asked to play The Rock, I feel like The Rock for the last like 10 years is only ever being asked to play The Rock. Like the movie that he's doing with the Safdies, where he's like playing the boxer or whatever, like that's I think coming out this year. Like that seems like that's going to be the first acting challenge for him in some time. Which is disappointing because I remember like early in his career he would go and do stuff like is it Get Shorty, I think?
The sequel to Get Shorty. It was
whatever it is. Like he's
so good in that movie.
He's
insanely good.
He can be good and he can be fun. And like I remember things like I really liked him in like Get Smart, where he's playing he's playing type, but then when he plays against type too, there's a lot of fun to be had there. That's why probably like the Jumanji movies are like my favorites of his in recent years, because he's playing his like physicality, but then he gets to play like a goofy person that is like inhabiting that body.
Well, and it's cool in Jumanji 2, he gets to be a completely different player, even, which is great. Like that's something that I think the thing that we get with these movies, and the reason why I wasn't hyped up to go see it, is because if I see The Rock in an action movie being like you said, the Red Notice, like he's the serious, tough, buff Rock, like the Hobbs, basically. I like that's my least favorite variety of Rock.
We go back to those stories of like, okay, they have it in their contracts that like Vin Diesel has to win these many fights and The Rock has to win this fight, and
but they just can't lose. They just can't lose fights, right? And you look at this. I mean, me and Trevor have talked about this a ton on this podcast before, but it's like you look at that versus something like Jackie Chan, who gets the shit kicked out of him in every fight. But that makes him more of a human being, and it makes those fights more intense and engaging and fun. And like you look at a lot of like the Vin Diesel fights throughout the years or Rock fights, and it just sort of like when you know you can't lose, nothing sort of matters.
There's zero stakes. It sucks.
But cool. It's out
free
there
on Amazon Prime. I would
Prime.
recommend everyone watch it. Make it like the last Christmas movie of the year for you. But I think you'll like it.
There you go.
The last Christmas movie, by the time this goes live, the 13th of January.
So my number 10, I don't think is going to be on anybody else, maybe Logan's. Mean Girls. Is another one I watched late in the year. It came out early in the year, but I didn't see it in theaters. I waited until watching it on
Interesting.
that might have been an Amazon Prime thing, whereas I was just going through in part because I was like, I need at least 10 movies to talk about. And I liked the original. I'm obviously a big fan of musicals and stuff. This probably came like I watched it after Wicked and being on the high of like, let me go and watch, like, let me see, as somebody who knew that Mean Girls like did well as a musical on Broadway, but didn't see this version of it when it came to theaters. I was like, and hasn't listened to the Mean Girls like soundtrack or anything like that. I was like, let me see how they did adapting the Mean Girls movie to the musical. And it just hits my top 10. It's the Mean Girls movie that we know from 20 years ago. But in particular, I want to shout out Ali Cravalho, who is also the voice of Moana. She plays Janice in this.
Oh, wow.
And she is like so fun getting to like bite into Janice and be kind of that like mean, like not mean girl, but like she's the vindictive one who has the grudge against the mean girls.
I mean, that's the kind of point of Mean Girls, is like they're all mean girls.
And so like her playing against the type of like the Moana character is a lot of fun. That's in this. Cool. And she has a couple of the best numbers in the film as well, that were a ton of fun. Anjali Rice is Katie Heron, she was Ned's girlfriend in the second Spider-Man Homecoming, or like the Far From Home movie, who's also one of the newscaster kind of things. She's in this. She's a lot of fun in that role. And then Renee Rapp, I think, is really steals the show as Regina George. I believe she played the role originally on Broadway.
She did. I love her. She's incredible.
Yeah, is a great ton of fun in this. It was Mean Girls, but it was much like musicals that I've really enjoyed in recent years, be it Wicked or be it In the Heights from a couple years ago. They do a great job of like big ensemble chorus numbers, and whether it's dancing out on the school campus or in the halls or whatever, like it's good fun spectacle, and they do a good job of translating that from the stage onto the big screen kind of thing. And so yeah, it was fun. It's another one that like as with Beetlejuice doesn't really need to exist, but like the performances in this one and the fact that it was like built on an already like good and enjoyable story, elevates it into my top 10. It was a fun kind of end of year thing that I just sat down with to go back and be like, hey, that's a movie I was interested in back when it came out. As much as I hate how movie studios hide the fact that they're making musicals in their trailers, like they did with this one, like
Willy Wonka
go watch
too.
the trailers for this. It's very much like, oh, we're trying to absolutely hide. We're just trying to tell you that this is just a remake of the original without any kind of like musical number giveaways in there. It's like you're just gonna piss people off with like the bait and switch approach there, but knowing that it was a musical. I always go back to when our friend Plank didn't know that Dear Evan Hansen was a musical.
Oh my gosh, that was so funny
because he'd seen the trailers but had no idea that was going to be a musical.
That was during his Movie Pass era where he was seeing everything. Like, if you want to know why Movie Pass didn't succeed, it's our friend Plank literally saw every film known to man.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, shout out to Mean Girls, the 2024 version, and some really fun, stellar performances there in the mix. So that is my number 10. So let's dive now. Yeah, into our number 9s. Cameron, I will throw it back to you. What is your number 9 movie of the year?
My number 9 movie of the year is Moana 2.
Oh.
Did you catch that one, Logan?
I did not see Moana 2.
I did not either. So this is all you again, Cam.
Yeah, if anybody wants to hear like really in-depth thoughts, I covered it with that Nerdy Site show a couple weeks ago. This was a December release, perfect for the family time. We found
November,
sorry,
holiday,
November.
like Thanksgiving release.
Yeah, holiday time. What I want to say is, if you go back there, Trevor really helps me go on a deep dive to figure out like the kind of creation and evolution of Moana 2. It's my number 9 movie because it's just not as... Moana is one of my favorite Disney movies. And so getting a sequel, I was pretty like, I don't know how that's like, I'm a little dicey on it because like where Moana 1 ends is really, really great and kind of perfect. Moana 2 kind of kickstarting it, knowing that it started off as a Disney Plus series and kind of how that evolved into the movie we get in Moana 2 is a detriment to it as a film and is the reason why a lot of characters exist. It's very clear these are characters that were supposed to grow and evolve over the course of like a season of television. And they're very much, their character design is very simple and very just like very generic on a lot of ways, the way that you would expect an ensemble cast for an animated Disney Plus show, an animated kids show to be. And so they don't have a lot of depth to their character. Moana ends up getting some of that depth that she needs for this second film about like, what does it mean not just to be a leader of her people, but also what does it mean to like, why are we unable to find other people? I've been going to these islands after islands after islands, and I've only found like one clue that says people were here once. And then it delves deeper into the mythology of the Pacific Islander culture and mythology, bringing up, other points, stuff that like watching Moana 1 with my niece a couple weeks ago. I'm like, oh, there's a couple of references here that we didn't get fleshed out into like full-on gods and goddesses and creatures in this film. And there's definitely a deeper touchstone to that culture that I think saves this from being like just a like whatever mediocre movie. It really helps elevate it up there. There is a sting teaser for a Moana 3. My hope is that when we get that movie, it is a fully fledged film with with that depth and layers of storytelling that you want with it. Another thing, too, is that Lin-Manuel Miranda did not come back to make this movie. So the music is very by the numbers. I wish it was better. The music just is not... I can't, there's only one or two songs that I think actually, rise above the rest of the quality of the music. And one of them is just one of the Rocks numbers, which is just a fun, motivational, you gotta,
Give me a Chihu.
Yeah, Chihu. it really is like about, and you get to see, and another thing about it is you get to see an aspect of Maui that is a what he means to the people. We saw what it meant when he was down on his luck, but now we get to see him as sort of an inspirational point for what does it mean for the other people of Moana's culture when you have this demigod by your side. Because Moana and him, they develop a friendship, a kinship, a bond between them that is what carries them through to the end of Moana 1. And Maui being a mythical figure, how do other people of her tribe look at Maui? How is that felt? How is that seen? To the point where you have like a fanboy, somebody who has written fan fiction, basically, ostensibly, about him being best friends with Maui and them like, and they're like basically dreaming of a bromance with him. And so like there's a lot of like fun humor tones to it. But I really wish that the supporting cast had more layer and depth to them. It suffers because of that. But it's still a really fun movie, really a fun time. But I would say, like, if we're talking recent Disney releases, this is like mid-tier.
Yeah, if you watch the YouTube series Pitch Meeting with Ryan George, he had a good pitch meeting on Moana 2, where he's doing his pitch to producer guy and screenwriter guys like, wait, no, you told me to do this as a series.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're doing it as a movie now. All right. And then it's like so much of the meeting is like, well, here's how I had it envisioned as a series. But if we're doing it in a movie, yeah, those characters aren't going to get any kind of character growth now because they're going to get introduced. They're going to have one thing that they do, and that's it.
They do have but the thing is, it's such a sudden shift for it.
Yeah.
You never get that build for a payoff to it. It's just, oh, they changed. It's a flip of the switch. You don't get the dial of like that up, like that, those personal arcs going.
Yep. All right. Logan, let's hit me with your number 9 movie of the year.
This could be higher on either one of your lists. My next one is going to be Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
It's higher on my list.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, it's an honorable mention on mine, but I knew it was going to be higher on Cameron's list, so we will talk about it then. So my number 9 may also be higher on other people's lists. Furiosa, a Mad Max saga.
A little bit higher on mine.
A little higher on your list as well. All right. Then nice quick run through our number 9s.
Cameron!
And we dive into, right back to you, Cameron, for our number 8s. What's your number 8 movie of the year, Cam?
Number 8, I'm going to be real brief on this one because we literally just did a That D Plus show on it that would have come out on Friday. Idea Man. Idea Man is a documentary about Jim Henson. It is a very... if you want to hear my full thoughts on it, watch that D Plus show. Trevor and I really go in on it for a little while. But overall, I think it is just there's another film on my list that is a documentary that came out on Disney Plus this year, where I describe that as like being a very like widening of my lens of like what has that person done. This one was much more of filling in the color on Jim Henson's life. I knew ostensibly about like his entire career and everything, but really to get to know a lot more of the details, a bit to know about more of his personal struggle and to, his drive to create and develop and produce and sort of that, like the sort of coloring in of what his work meant to the people who are around him. Not just, I've always seen stuff and heard stuff about how his work has impacted people. It's impacted me tremendously. But how did his own work also, how did it affect him? Like the success of Sesame Street, how did that affect him? The success of the Muppet Show, how did that affect him? And how did it change the way that he saw his own creativity? He is a true auteur and artist, and it's one of my favorite films of the year. So,
yeah, it's an honorable mention for me, and we were talking about this. Like I like that, and another one that I imagine is going to be higher on your list. There, I didn't like factor in or didn't think about them, despite the fact that we had watched them for that D Plus show. Just because like I was very focused on like theatrical releases in terms of like my movies of the year. But hey, that's not the market that we we exist in. Especially having a lot of these I didn't see in theaters, waited until they were going to be on streaming. Like, if I had watched Roadhouse, maybe that would have ended up making my my list.
It wouldn't have. It wouldn't have.
It wouldn't have.
It was my least favorite new release of the year was Roadhouse.
Okay, wow. Yeah,
is it number 20 on your list?
It was lower than that. I was number like 21, 22. I really did not care for Roadhouse.
Well, there you go. Never mind then. Yeah. All right. So it's Jim Henson Idea Man for Cameron's number 8. Logan, what was your number 8 of the year?
My number 8 movie for the year is a movie that I would be stunned if either one of you have seen, which would be Snack Shack.
I want to watch this one though. Like I've seen clips of it on TikTok, and I'm like, there's something to this movie that's fascinating.
It is Snack Shack. It is ostensibly a coming of age story set in like the early 90s, like 91, 92. Basically like two buddies decide to open up the Snack Shack at their local pool, and the hijinks and mischief that ensue. One of the two actors played basically the Steven Spielberg character in Fableman. And the other one is basically done very little.
I believe he was also the Lorne Michaels in My Saturday Night Movie. Right?
Oh yeah,
Gabriel LaBelle, right?
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And he's great in it. He's kind of the more extroverted, more of a character of the two, the main leads, and he's so engaging to watch. The kind of main actor of the two, in AJ, he's good. He's tasked with being the straight man a lot more and carrying kind of the romantic element of this. Snack Shack is a really interesting movie because I think it isn't doing a ton different in terms of a coming of age story. But I think the elements of it that I most enjoyed that are slightly different than a lot of coming of age stories is just this kind of an air of a lingering sadness to it all that I really enjoyed. The last like 20 or so minutes in particular probably bumped it up an entire like half a star for me on Letterboxd. Like it's just really allows itself to kind of be sad and to be melancholic, which there should be an era of in every coming of age story, right? Because you kind of pass it through one era to the next, and or if you're looking back and that kind of thing, right? Like in The Sandlot. But here it's like actually like sad, tragic stuff. I think all four of the main kids are excellent and really give this thing its personality and depth to it that it otherwise wouldn't have, because it is just sort of following by the numbers story otherwise. It is pretty funny. It's very foul-mouthed. It is very foul-mouthed, but very funny, very engaging. I really like the kind of central buddy relationship between the two of them. Even more than the
Mika. That's right. Mika Abdallah's in that movie. I love Mika Abdallah.
Yeah, she's
fantastic.
Kind of the main love interest. But even more than her dynamic with AJ, I like AJ and Moose's bromance a lot.
His name is Moose.
Yeah, that's his character's name is Moose. And yeah, I don't know. I really like it. I mean, there's obviously a lot of touchstones to like the 90s that we would all be familiar with, but it is a very, I don't know how to describe it. Just like, it's a very vibey movie. Like, it's just here for the vibes. There's no real sense of direction. Cameron, I think, talked about it earlier for a different movie, or maybe it was Trevor. It's like, it's very like character driven. There's no real end goal worth kind of striving for. But it sort of works. It just kind of lets you kind of like lazily mosey around this kind of like Midwest town in the early 90s, and just experience like this summer in these two kids' lives and what happens to them. And it's like ending in particular really works. It's really beautiful. It's really sad. It's very kind of wistful. It's all the things that I like from my coming of age stories in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, my number 8 is Snack Shack.
Nice. My number 8 is If, aka the Imaginary Friend movie that John Krasinski did. Yeah, I don't think that's anybody.
It's not on my list.
It did not make my top 10, no.
Kaylee Fleming plays kind of the main protagonist, B, a young girl who can see imaginary friends, and she gets kind of brought into the imaginary friends world through Ryan Reynolds' character Cal, and she basically they work together to try and like pair up imaginary friends with like the people that they belong to, and it's very like charming and whimsical, and it's all about the power of storytelling. The opening 5 minutes is very reminiscent of something like Up, where it's like, oh, here's a very tragic short story that kind of sets us on the path of why this girl the girl, her dad's played by John Krasinski, and like the mom, passes away and early on, and we see kind of through like home movies-esque kind of montage, like the family having fun with all these imaginary characters and like the stories that they told. And then we fast forward, a number of years, and B is a little bit more grown up, but she's still a kid. And her dad's going through some medical stuff that is like the trauma inherent in that is like flashing her back to when her mom died in that hospital room kind of thing. And so it's very much like about her trying to cope while also trying to, use the power of these imaginary friends, voiced by like a, insane all-star cast of like Steve Carell and Phoebe Waller-Bridge and all sorts of big names out there. And it's just, it's another one I wanted to see back when it came out, didn't ever get around to watching it, but when I was kind of wrapping up at the end of the year, I was just looking for like, oh, let's go and find movies that I did want to see that I can go grab on streaming now. And yeah, I pulled this one up, and it's just it has such a like delight and whimsy to it that much to what you were just talking about, Logan. Like this is all about the vibes.
Yeah.
And the vibes of the imaginary characters. Like some of the imaginary characters are played purely for laughs. Some imaginary character. One imaginary character is like a marshmallow that's being roasted on a fire, and they're it's in the trailers and stuff, but they're like, don't look at the eye, and it's like, what do you mean? And like you cut to the marshmallow, and like the eye is drooping and just falling off because it's a constantly roasting marshmallow. But then there's like dragons, or there's this big it has almost like Monsters Inc-esque vibes to it, cool. Especially with like the blue character, which is the big main one that Steve Carell voices, who's very big and like Sully, but not trying to be scary or anything like that. It is like he is just trying to the premise is like all of these imaginary friends, their adults have grown up and forgotten them, and so they're trying to be placed with a new kid, but that's not how it really works, kind of thing. And so can the imaginary friends still go back and find the adult version of their kids and like somehow bring some sort of life into them and the feeling of them? And there's some like really just beautiful, heartwarming moments in this that I enjoyed and was very charmed by. It's another one like going back to like the Red One. Ryan Reynolds being this, I kind of know exactly what Ryan Reynolds is going to do in this movie. But he also, this is one that like John Krasinski, I think is such a fascinating creative mind, going from something like A Quiet Place and like the horrors of that, and in Quiet Place being like one of the few horror movies that like I can really get behind and enjoy, and from like the first trailers of it, like the idea of A Quiet Place being something very interesting, this very much being John Krasinski wanting to make a movie for his kids, and so he kind of like turned this story that he told his kids into this movie. It's charming and endearing, and I really enjoyed this, and has a lot of just very beautiful, heartwarming moments throughout. So yeah, shout outs to If. Did you see it, Logan? You said it didn't make your top 10, but
no, I didn't see it, but I've seen chunks of it on YouTube.
It sounds a lot like Foster's Home for the Imaginary Friends to me, which is great. That's a excellent comparison for it. So.
Sure. All right,
more like social services for imaginary friends.
A little bit, yeah. So then we will dive into our number sevens. So Cam, hit me with your number 7 movie of the year.
A previous one that you mentioned, Furiosa.
Furiosa. Is that anywhere else on your list, Logan?
It is not going to be higher on my list.
All right, then we will go ahead and chat about Furiosa, a Mad Max saga here. Cam, take it away.
Sure. I thought Furiosa, if we went deep on it, when we, because you also watched like Fury Road right afterwards, like it definitely put us in like a Mad Max mood. And I think it nails the vibe of what Mad Max is going for. I think it just fails to elevate, it's just a fun, like adrenaline rushing fuel, like just adrenaline fueled film, right? It has big cars, big trucks going through the desert, mayhem, chaos, bloodshed. But what I think it really carries that movie through is Anna Taylor-Joy as Furiosa. I feel like she captures Charlize Theron's like a younger vision of that character, of that Furiosa character. I don't have a problem with like recasting for younger, because we did that with, going into Fury Road. We did that. And the idea that who Max looks like and who Furiosa looks like, they can look like whatever the person imagines, because these are stories being told and passed down, right? Of like the wasteland and things like that. I found like one of the best parts was seeing what her home looked like before. It droughted over and became the swamplands, the wetlands that we see in Fury Road. I felt that the vengeance-fueled like pursuit that Furiosa has was just like well done and well carried out. I felt like our pseudo Mad Max character and her love interest, loved that, like loved the character, loved the actor. I loved their building of their trust and their care. I loved that they have like that spot in the cliff face that comes back around at the end in a lot of ways. But what I loved about the film is just about everything about it. The only thing that bogs it down a little bit is that it's really, really long. And it just does not elevate itself above what it already is, which is great. It's my number 7 movie of the year. But there is just then we get into Chris Hemsworth, which is probably the biggest like one of the bigger positives, but also what the biggest negative of the film. His character feels really well, like a very good Mad Max villain, but I feel like has too much screen time for a Mad Max villain. A lot of times feels like. I love that it fleshed out what a Morton Joe's empire looks like. I love that we have the fuel yards, we have the bullet farm, we have all these things, and I love the kind of spectacle that these locations turn into. But then there's also some very janky CG at certain points. Certain things like, I get it. There are certain sequences that are practical, that are some of the most impressive practical effects work and practical like effects acting on that I've ever seen. The stunt work in this film is immaculate.
Yeah.
But it's then in juxtaposition to just not quite their CGI in a lot of places. And that comes across very apparent. Like when you have top level practical work and then kind of like middle tier CGI, it makes the CGI just look way worse. And yeah, like, yes, they couldn't do like a bajillion bullets practically for whatever reason, budgetary, like timing, COVID, etc.
Right.
Like whatever reasons you want to give for it. You couldn't do like that scene where the bullets tip over and we get a bajillion bullets. Like that's clearly CGI and it's very apparent. And it's things like that it's like, I get why that's CGI. It just sucks that it's CGI. Overall though, I think that it does have a place in my heart and in the canon of Mad Max. I'm one of those people that I love the original Mad Max film. So when we're talking about like the kind of style of George Miller, right? I'm just trying to make sure I'm not confusing him with another.
George Miller, not Frank Miller.
Thank you. That's what I was afraid of. I was confusing it for Frank Miller. George Miller continues to have his vision, like have an eye for the kind of films that he's making. And that vision is still coming true on film. And I think it succeeds in all the ways that it needs to. But it never over exceeds. It never excels. And instead it's hampered by things that I think would have helped make that bigger if it was more practical. So I understandably not as practical, but I still loved it. I had a great time with it.
Yeah, my number 9, and a lot of the thoughts I had on it, you kind of mirror what you talked about. I like the practical things in this movie are so like freaking cool, and like in particular, I remember the the big like heist convoy sequence that's like the big early action set piece, be like them saying like that was like 30 days of filming kind of thing, and it shows. Yeah, juxtaposed against like the CG where they had to cut corners, like it's like, okay, yeah, those are the weaker elements. Anya Taylor-Joy, big fan of hers. It's another one that almost felt like a bait and switch because like she's not in the first half of this movie, because the first half of the movie is a young Furiosa before we get to that era of Furiosa. But once we do get to her, she knocks it out of the park. Chris Hemsworth, I really like as Dementus. I thought he was a good, fun villain especially because this is a prequel. We know that Immortan Joe isn't going to get his comeuppance in this movie, and we know that like his lieutenants that we've seen, they all die in Fury Road, so they're not going to be a threat in this one. So I like that Dementus comes in, and Chris Hemsworth hiding behind a big old fake nose prosthetic, having a ton of fun.
It looks like Gonzo. It looks like Gonzo's nose. I realized that while putting my list together and watching Idea Man this week. I'm like, oh my gosh, he just said, give me Gonzo's nose.
Yeah.
And they did.
But yeah, I also really like, especially going back and rewatching Mad Max Fury Road right after, like the places that are referenced in Mad Max Fury Road, really getting to see those, like you said, the fuel yards and the bullet farm, getting to see those kind of fleshed out here, and Dementus kind of taking them over and just immediately running them into the ground because he's a dumbass, is a lot of fun.
Very Elon Musk-esque, I would say.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, there was a ton of fun in this, but it ended up kind of feeling too style and not enough substance for me. Is really like what kind of brought it down a few pegs for me in terms of like my ranking. But the style that is there, and I think it is like it suffers because it's not as good as Mad Max Fury Road was, and like you go back and watch Mad Max Fury Road, even now 10, 15 years on or whatever, and like so much of that holds up because of the practicalness and because of like the attention to detail in there, whereas there were a lot of things in Furiosa where it's like, I wish this looked better than it does, but the budget ran out.
Because they shot that scene for 30 days.
But yeah, still, as you said, like the Praetorian Jack character as like the Mad Max stand-in, a lot of fun, and the relationship that like the mentor / love relationship that we get with him in Furiosa is great.
His death is awesome as well. Like it's brutal. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You really, really feel it.
Yeah.
Their forehead touch that happens in that scene is better than any makeout scene in this entire year. It's so seeing what they've gone through and getting to, and like knowing that she came back for him. Like that is such a heart-wrenching moment of like, we know this is the end for us, but this is how we're saying goodbye. And it's like, it is brutal.
Yeah. So yeah, solid pick. Logan, hit us with your number 7.
My number 7 is Tilu 2, which is a Telugu language film that is on Netflix.
Okay, I was like, I have no idea what that
I was like, wait, The Last of Us 2?
Yeah, I was like, I heard like Tulu 2, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is.
So Tilu 2, that you should watch. It's fun. It is a comedy, and it is absolutely bonkers absurd. It is just, to me, it's like a great definition of like a fun, silly time. I think, the first half of the movie, I think, is quite a bit stronger than the post-intermission half. But I think even that part is still good, as it kind of gets more into like more of the mystery side of things, of kind of what exactly is going on. And the ending, I think, is the weakest part still. it doesn't really work. But I don't know. It's just like maybe my favorite pure comedy of the year. It's like an absolutely gonzo time. I think that the cast of characters around there are also perfectly goofy or serious, but goofy because of that, or silly. And then the lead of the movie, Sidhu Janalagada, is incredible. He is so magnetic and so captivating to watch on screen, and such a like dynamic comedy screen presence. And like speaking at like a million miles an hour, throwing out jokes and like bits every other word. It's very funny. It's like very like almost like Jim Carrey-esque like manic energy, I think. Like early 90s Jim Carrey. And it works really well. So I had a ton of fun with it. It's very fun. It's very flashy. It's very colorful. It's very silly. It's exactly what I'd want from like a Telugu comedy film in a lot of ways. And I think it really delivers on that. Again, I think it gets shakier when it gets into kind of more of like its central mystery elements of it. But on the whole, I had a really great time with it. And the other thing I would like to say about Tilu 2 is Shrabia's father, when we saw this in the Bay when we were there, and he was like, you should go watch this movie on Netflix. And we were like, oh, okay, yeah. And we were like, oh, it's a sequel. And he's like, it's a sequel, but you don't need to watch the first one at all. It's not relevant. You can just dive right into it. And we're like, oh, okay, cool. And then we watched the movie, and it is directly connected to the first movie and makes about 1 million references to that movie and has like core characters come back in. And I was like, I don't know what I'm like, you can watch it like we did, and it's totally, again, it's my 7th favorite movie of the year. It's fine. But like, definitely, if you can, I'd probably recommend watching the first one first, because it's very much referenced throughout. It takes place 1 year later. So that was also very funny to me, be like almost immediately being like, I think this is actually needed, but it's a good time. It's a ton of fun, and it is my number 7 movie for the year.
Nice. It took me a little while to find it just so I could get the spelling on this. It looks like it's also referenced Tilu Square.
Yeah.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Cool. And it looks like they've got a Tilu Cube coming sometime in the future as well.
Yeah, but it's on Netflix. I'd recommend it. And it's comparatively short for an Indian language film. I think it's like just like I don't even think it's 2.5 hours.
It's two. Looks like 2 hours 3 minutes.
Yeah, so very short, very easy. So yeah, that's my number 7.
Very cool. My number 7, I imagine going to be higher on your list, at least, Cameron. Deadpool and Wolverine.
It is higher on my list.
All right, then we will jump over to number 6s. So Cam, hit me with your number 6 movie of the year.
I referenced it a little bit earlier, but this is another Disney Plus documentary. This is music by John Williams. This is the one where I said I had no idea the depth and breadth of this man's career. To get full thoughts about it, Trevor and I talked about it way in depth. We really gushed over John Williams in that Disney Plus episode. John Williams is the most iconic composer of the century, of last century, in my opinion. I think he is continues to be this century as well. A lot of people might be like, well, what about Hans Zimmer? I'm like, if you watch this documentary, you understand. First off, he wasn't trained as a composer. He was just a jazz musician. And one of my favorite things about that movie is you get a moment where George Lucas, who's really into jazz, when is introduced to John Williams is brought up, he goes, John Williams, the jazz musician? Because that's what he was. And then he got into composing because it paid a little better. And he became this incredible, iconic performer. His kismet relationship with Steven Spielberg created the music of generations, not a generation, generations. His brilliance is like, he is our modern day Mozart, our modern day Beethoven. He is dismissed because he makes movie music. You find out like the reaction people had when he took over the Boston Philharmonic, and like just the like awful experience he had with that. You find out like a lot of serious things that happened in his career. He's a workaholic, struggles with family stuff. But then also like one of the best music he's ever written has nothing to do with movies. It's an ode to his deceased first wife. The work he does for music, like to help people create music, to help found and fund and raise money for and be part of the next generation of musicians and music makers, is he's unparalleled in his influence in music. And if you had asked me 6 months ago, Cam, what do you think about John Williams? I'm like, oh, I like his music. I have a completely different opinion about him now. The movie and documentary does an incredible job of fleshing him out and also just highlighting this is a guy, he's all about his work. When we talk about trendsetters and generational talent, this is it. Similar to Idea Man with Jim Henson, that man is an auteur. His eye and vision of creativity is unbounded by the restrictions of reality and the limitations people put on themselves as far as their mental capacity for creation go. That is equivocally said about John Williams when it comes to music. He's if you were to tell me, oh, he sees music because he has that disorder that you see, music, it appears to you visually as colors. I'd believe it because he is an artist. He creates tapestries, murals with his music. If that and I can't imagine what somebody who listens to his music who has that audio, I think it's audio dysphoria or something like that. I'm curious what you see when you hear his music now. It's so brilliant, but at the same time, a lot of times it's so simple. Jazz's theme is ba-dum, 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 and ba-da, ba-da, but the emotion you feel when it's tied to the visuals is crazy. He's incredible. He's responsible for some of the best music that's ever been written, and it's tied to some of the best films that have ever been made. John Williams is that's music by John Williams. Just the revelation that was his career is what propelled this above major motion pictures like Furiosa or Challengers or other films like that. It really cements it to me as I almost fought to have it in my top 5, but my number 5 does win out over it.
Yeah. A couple items there. Synesthesia is,
Synesthesia.
Is when you can see colors when you hear music. Specifically a sound color synesthesia or chromesthesia. And then also a quick correction. John Williams was conductor for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, not Boston Philharmonic. He worked at the LA Philharmonic.
That's
Los
right.
Angeles
there we
Philharmonic.
go.
That's where he does
and they respected his ass. So
music by John Williams, another one of my honorable mentions. Really enjoyed it. It was a great documentary to jump into. And I will shout out also on Disney Plus, you can find John Williams in Tokyo is basically a concert that he conducted in Tokyo in the last couple of years with their symphony orchestra. So shout out to John Williams. And just echoing kind of what Cameron said, the joy of getting to see the lifelong collaboration between Steven Spielberg and John Williams was so much fun of that documentary. And I highlighted this when we talked about it, both on that D Plus show as well as when we talked about Idea Man. The fact that a lot of that documentary is credited as Steven Spielberg home movies because he would always have his camera around, and so he would be there at the London, orchestra filming John Williams conducting the London orchestra for Star Wars or something like that. Just adds so much of a personal layer to it of this is we're getting a peek behind the curtain into their collaborations and their relationship. And I think probably one of the highlights of it is the fact that the documentarian was there to interview, John or Steven or whatever, but they just do an interview together and you just hear the two of them, sharing their stories together instead of okay, here's one talking head and then here's another talking head. Getting the banter between the two of them is just a lot of fun in that one. So yeah, absolutely shout out to music by John Williams. Great call there, Cam. Logan, your number 6 movie of the year.
Yes, just missing out on my top 5. My number 6 movie of the year is The Fall Guy.
Hey, that's my number 6 as well. So we can
go.
We can chat about it right here because
I'll let you guys chat. Didn't see it.
Yep. There we go. The Fall Guy. Great call. Take it away, Logan.
I think The Fall Guy is excellent. I think it's a ton of fun. I think Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt's chemistry is out of this world. I think it's some of the best like rom-com chemistry I've seen in years, honestly. It is like Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan levels for me. And so I could watch them do anything, I feel like. They are so effortless throughout this movie. They're so funny and witty and engaging. I love how in love they feel at times. I think there is just sort of a magic to their on-screen dynamic. I think that, outside of them, Winston Duke is really excellent. Really, really excellent. And my, the biggest exposure I've had to Winston Duke would probably be the Black Panther series. Sure. And so to see him do something very different than that, and just be excellent and fun and engaging, I hope we get more of him in these type of roles and bigger, because he's so much fun, I think. It was funny to have, the cast that we get in The Fall Guy, which is genuinely a really stacked cast, and just see them all have such a good time. It feels like a very silly thing to say, but I just really enjoy a cast all seemingly having a great time making a movie. I think that's part of the magic of the Knives Out series. Either the original Knives Out or Glass Onion is just like, it just feels like an excuse for these people to just all get together and have a great time making a movie. And that very much is the energy that I got in The Fall Guy. It's just like a great cast all just doing fun things together. I do think the ending is the weakest part of me. The last act is the weakest part for me. I don't care for that as much. Probably build into the moment of like him coming back to the set at the end onwards, I don't really care for as much. But everything before that, I think, is genuinely excellent. And it's just like firing on all cylinders. The stunts are incredible, like you'd expect. The stunt work in general is just like really extraordinary. And obviously, David Leitch made it as like a love letter to his own past and like the stunt work team and to all the stunt work operators he's dealt with over the years. And seeing this movie has led to like another push for like having like best stunts be included in like the Oscars and that kind of thing, because you just get to see so much of like the work and a devotion and attention and preparation and practice that goes into delivering these stunts that we talk about, whether they're in movies like Mad Max or the Bond films or Mission Impossible, whatever it might be. Like how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into the things that kind of wow audiences. And so I love it for that as well. For me, almost literally, its biggest flaw is its last act. But outside of that, I think it's fine on all cylinders. And I love Aaron Tyler Johnson just playing such a swarmy little asshole throughout this movie. He's excellent. He's great. He's a great foil to play off of Ryan Gosling. They have great chemistry. I mean, honestly, Ryan Gosling has great chemistry with almost every single person he comes across here. But their dynamic in particular is also really, really excellent.
He has great chemistry with a Miami Vice jacket. Like he has great chemistry with everything. And it was incredible. So many of the things you touched on are exactly why it's my number 6 as well. The opening little sequence that we get of this great banter, like this oneer of Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt having this like flirtatious, relationship over the walkie as Ryan Gosling is like going up to do a stunt that's basically, we see him get taken over the ledge because he's going to do a big fall kind of thing. Like the stunt work is absolutely the set piece of this movie. And that's like comparing it back to Furiosa. Like if all of Furiosa was the quality of like the big convoy sequence, it would be this movie again. Like it was also a huge movie or a huge year for Australian stuntmen, as well as and this was a funny little thing. I'll call it out here as well. Years ago, like, I don't know, early Facebook, I stumbled into on YouTube this group called the Umbilical Brothers, a pair of like very physical comedian mimes. One of them is in both the Fall Guy and in Furiosa and Mad Max saga, because they're like an Australian mime duo kind of thing. And yeah, he was like one of them. It was basically like he was Dementis's like right hand man in there, and he's like one of the crewmen on the set. I think he's like the sound guy actually in the Fall Guy. And so yeah, seeing him pop up in two places, I was like, hey, it's that guy from the Umbilical Brothers. Good for him. But yeah, I love that like. The credits reel that's playing in this movie is like all the behind the scenes stunt stuff, and it's a love letter to the stuntmen, as you kind of touched on.
It's very
like,
Jackie Chan itself. How he ends his movies, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And Ryan Gosling was out there the entire press tour push for this movie, pushing for the stuntmen, and like the stuntmen doing stunts at the premiere and doing silly stuff like that was a ton of fun. In addition to people you called out, Hannah Waddingham, also a ton of fun in this movie, just relishing.
And very different than her
Ted Lasso character.
Very different.
She's basically like the movie producer, and she's just like eating up the scenery when she's in there. So much fun, so much charm, and going back and seeing like, because obviously like Emily Blunt and Ryan Gosling had some fun like red carpet banter with one another last year during the like Barbie Oppenheimer stuff, obviously because they had also been working on this movie together, and so they got to like celebrate the fact that they were part of the two biggest movies last year, and then kind of go straight into this. They both of them always a delight to see, and the pairing of them in this one especially was so much fun. Winston Duke, you call out, absolutely steals every scene he's in this one, and is a ton of fun there. But yeah, so much of this came down to like, I just loved the practicality of seeing the stunts, and like even the behind the scenes stuff there. They do one of the big stunts in the movie is like a car roll, and they broke a world record doing this car roll, and they highlighted that in like the promotional tour, 8.5 rolls. And they like the meta-ness of the actual stunt driver being the one that on screen puts Ryan Gosling into that car, and then is like the first to congratulate him after the scene is done, being the guy who actually did the role, is like this weird little meta commentary thing. And the movie is just littered with those kinds of funny little Easter eggy things. As somebody who loves the now Waterworld series, but also grew up loving the Miami Vice water show in Universal Studios Hollywood, like the references and how critical of a thing that becomes, of like that being part of the Ryan Gosling character backstory, was just a lot of fun and silliness to it. And so yeah, this was a delight. It's another one I went back and rewatched in the year end kind of stuff, like threw it on just because it was a fun thing to have in the background. And Fall Guy, absolutely a delight. And so much fun to see that movie. I wish it had done better at the box office, just because of how much fun and how practical so much of it was. But yeah, everybody in it is having such a fun time.
It's just excellent.
Delight. And some fun cameos too, tying into your third act kind of stuff, like the Comic-Con trailer that we see is just a silly fun goof. So shout out to the Fall Guy. A pair of sixes here. So let's dive into top fives. Yeah, here we go.
Top fives.
Cam, hit me with your number 5 movie of the year.
Do you hear that, Trevor?
No.
It sounds like something strange in our neighborhood.
Oh, God.
Who should we call?
You're doing a dumb bit. Okay.
The Ghostbusters. That's right. Everybody, it's Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is my number 5 movie of the year. Why did it beat out music by John Williams? Because I had so much fun with this movie. I had a great time with it. It was so much fun. I've watched it's on Netflix, and I've watched it since then. Just what a fun movie. What a, like, clearly they made some decisions that, like, rewatching some trailers and stuff and other people's breakdowns, it's like, yeah, they went in a more family-friendly direction than the movie was definitely originally going to make.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Like that girl was definitely going to die.
Yeah,
in the
she was
original
definitely
version of
dead.
the movie, yeah.
Like, she definitely dies in the trailer. I love it. I love the expansion. I love that they're paying off on the kind of like tease ending of, you know, the Ghostbusters that came out a few years ago.
Yeah.
I love all the actors in it. It's such a fun time. Finn Wolfhard definitely gets kind of the short end of the stick in this movie as well.
I agree. Well, I'll get into that.
I feel like, but I feel like he's such a fun person to be there. And honestly, if I want to have anybody of that cast interact with Slimer, he's one of the top two for sure. It's him and Paul Rudd that I want to see interact with Slimer. The fact that Slimer is like as somebody who had to deal with a roof rat at the beginning of last year, the fact that Slimer is basically a roof rat is put a fun twist on a horrible thing that happened to Trevor and I last year. Not much of a twist. It was still terrible. I still have I still get paranoid. Even at my parents' place, I get paranoid when I hear like scratching or anything anywhere. I'm like, oh, the roof rat's back. But the movie itself is just fun. It's also a movie about a family like figuring itself out. It's a sort of like take on, well, he's not my dad and he's not my stepdad, but he's basically the best father figure I've ever had in my life. And just kind of like what does it mean to build a family out of the pieces of other families? What does it mean to take on legacy? What does it mean but also knowing that there's something deeper out there in the ghost realm. This was 2024 was a great year for Ghostbusters as a franchise. The Ilphonic game did very well from what I understand. And it's just overall a great time for Ghostbusters. And I love that Ghostbusters is fun. I love that it is fun and it has this movie has such a level and layer of depth that I was not anticipating with the villain ghost, and knowing that the villain ghost is tied to this other culture and it's this other it's another apocalypse, but this apocalypse is so different than the ones they've already touched on. It's a complete answer, I think, to the criticism that was, oh, it's just Gozer again for the last Ghostbusters movie. That this time they're like, we're going so far outside of what we normally do. We're bringing in different culture. We're going to bring in Kumail, who is just hilarious. Finn Wolfhard and Kumail going into his grandma's hidden closet is phenomenal. It's such a funny scene. A little more adult than what you would expect out of a family movie. But it's great. The chemistry he has with the rest of the cast is phenomenal. Him getting at the end, telegraphed, whatever, I don't care. I loved it. It was just such a fun action romp in New York, having fun, ghost busting. It's great. Also, the fact that Peck somehow ended up as like mayor of New York is just such a bitter twist of like this guy, he's still such a prick.
Yeah.
Yep. Also great callbacks and the past cast showing up again in a way that also doesn't overshadow the modern cast. I felt was great.
Yeah. Logan, you had this at number 9.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like so often I've had to defend excuse me. I've so often had to defend enjoying this movie because it got, I feel like, a good amount of hate when it came out. And now I'm in the odd position of not enjoying it as much as someone, which has not really happened so far this year. Indeed, even kind of reading my Letterboxd reviews, most of you being like, this movie's good, actually, guys. And indeed, I think the movie is really fun and really great. I think Cameron laid out a lot of what I like about the movie. I think it's very fun. I think it's very engaging. Paul Rudd continues to be an excellent addition to the series. Camille Nanjiani and Patton Oswalt are both such amazing, fun additions to this movie. They both are so genuinely funny and like these kind of lights that add joy and levity to everything. I think the incorporation of the original cast more into this movie from where we were in the prior film is really cool. And yet, I don't think this movie is as good as Afterlife. I don't really think it's close, actually. I think Afterlife is pretty easily the second best Ghostbusters movie after the original. I think Afterlife is really great and special.
I'd agree with you on that.
I think my biggest issue for this one is basically everything with the Phoebe character in this movie I do not like.
I'm sorry you hate lesbians. I'm sorry you hate ghost lesbians.
Yeah, I guess I do.
Okay.
I didn't realize this about me, but
the movie hated ghost lesbians because they didn't commit to it.
That's true.
I don't like it. And I think this movie way more, like Cameron kind of mentioned, way more than Afterlife, places her firmly front and center as the most important character of this new series of Ghostbusters films. And I think it doesn't work in this movie. I think, and it really sucks because Finn Wolfhard, I think, is great in Afterlife and is just a talented actor in general. And he sort of has kind of nothing to do for a lot of this movie. He's just kind of off on his own side quest, which is unfortunate because, I mean, to Cameron's point, there are some very funny bits, but it's also like he can do more than that. And their decision to put Phoebe so dominant into this thing, I think, sort of falls under the weight of that. I just think her stuff is very melodramatic. It's very soap opera-y to me. It doesn't work.
That's why I love it. That's why I love it, though.
It's just really like bad silly. I think all the stuff with the ghost connection that she has with the ghost doesn't work, doesn't land. I think the ending where the ghost sort of turns back doesn't land for me. I think kind of throughout, I'm like having a great time bopping along this movie, and then we come back to that and I'm like, oh right, none of this is working again, and it sort of slows everything down for me again. Because if we had like taken that out of this movie and put it aside, this movie is a lot closer to my top 5 like Cameron, but all the Phoebe stuff does just sort of halt the momentum every time we go back to it, especially because none of her actions that I feel like come from her dynamic with the ghost feel earned to me. So all the things she's doing just don't work and don't land, and they become an increasingly bigger and bigger sort of mushrooming part of the movie until by the end it's so dominant that I can't ignore it anywhere else, right? Which is a shame because I think so much of the rest of the movie does work really great. I like the fact the mayor is the asshole. I think that's a really great touch. I like Bill Murray in this. I like Dan Aykroyd in this. I just think for me, there is almost 2 movies kind of coexisting, and one is a Ghostbusters film, and one is this like soap opera dynamic between like a teenager and this ghost that she's in love with, but they don't commit to, like Trevor says, and they make it this like kind of like more ambiguous thing.
They just shouldn't let him kiss.
Yeah, or shouldn't let him just do anything. And that's, I guess, my issue is that, and this is something me and Trevor talked a lot about on that Bond show, go watch, is that neither one of us I feel like when movies go like halfway towards doing something, either do it or don't do it. And it feels like so much of that is just like them like committing half to it and then just like being very melodramatic about it. And it's like, this is not what Ghostbusters really is. And if you're going to make it what Ghostbusters is, then make it what Ghostbusters is. But don't try to do like halfway both kind of things. And then I feel like it does a disservice to that. It detracts from the larger thing, and it makes a movie that is ultimately really good. I feel like I've been more negative trying to balance out Cameron's thing. But I think Frozen Empire is great. I think all the hate it got is wildly misplaced. It's a ton of fun. I like the incorporation of the old cast. I like the fact that it's a silly movie. Yeah, I like the fact that we have like Slimer in here. I like the fact that we're going back to the library and doing those things. I think Patton Oswalt's great in this. I think Camille Nanjiani's great in this. It is just almost exclusively the Phoebe-centered stuff that I don't care for. It's just that's a pretty big part of this by the end of the movie.
Yeah, so this was an honorable mention in mine as well, and I enjoy it. I agree, though. I think Afterlife's a much better movie.
Yeah.
I think this suffers from some of from something we've talked about a couple other times on this episode of the like too many characters.
Yeah,
so it's trying to do too many things. It's you've got the new class, you've got the old class that you're trying to service, and you've got the Kamales and the Patton Oswalt. Like, as much as I enjoy them in this movie, Patton Oswalt comes in and is exposition for one scene, and that's it. Like, then he's done. And like, he was in the trailer and was like, oh, that's what all he's doing is just that exposition scene. Kumail, more fun, and I like that he gets, you know, more time and more intertwined with it. But even like that is like trying to introduce a whole other world of backstory into like his one little bit of the story that feels too much. Then you've got the, you know, the Ghostbusters Incorporated that Winston's put together, and like, you know, you've got James Acaster in there as like, you know, the head scientist guy of that group.
I love him so much.
They have fun things, but like, because there are so many people, he comes in and is completely forgettable of like, okay, he comes in, has like one or two things, he's in a sling, seemingly probably also dies in the final sequence.
That's another thing too, is
and we never see him again kind of thing. But no, then he's fine or whatever at the tail end.
I think they were afraid to kill off characters for potential future films or other things.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this a weaker movie as well. Like, clearly his friend who like got the internship and she is doing that, and it's like, that's great. And his actions directly pull her into danger and she dies. That would be a great arc for him, for Finn Wolfhard's character, of dealing with that. Dealing with like the death of like, oh, he's introduced, he does exposition, he kind of explains a lot of the things, the science, the quasi-science stuff, or sorry, pseudoscience stuff that needs to be introduced here. And then he dies. He's a victim of the ghost. That would have worked out much better, I think.
Yeah.
It does suffer from that.
It's telling that like the death I remember the most is like the adventurers at the beginning of the movie who are all frozen, and we see like the guy's hand has cut off with like the Victrola or whatever it is. It's like that's the image I remember in terms of like the big bad of this movie. And to a point you brought up, Cam, like I enjoy that, like, this isn't trying to do, you know, Gozer or you know, it's not trying to retread that territory, and it is, okay, here's a new, you know, the frozen death, you know, Sumerian god or whatever it is, but he's such a non-character that they had to create the Melody character for Phoebe to have some sort of like personal stakes in the bad guy. And I didn't hate it as much as Logan, or it didn't bother me as much as it bothered Logan. And I think McKenna Grace is a great little performer as Phoebe. But I agree that so much of Phoebe's story ends up becoming a tropey shorthand of, oh, yeah, she's in love, so she's doing all of the things that this really smart character otherwise wouldn't do. And it's like, no, you haven't given us any reason to believe that they would suddenly be this stupid and do all of these incredibly stupid things that they're doing in this movie. So didn't like that. But hey, shout out, they you know, they had a Vita that was possessed, or was it PSP? I don't remember. Sony just doing all sorts of cross branding there. So yeah, absolutely a fun movie, but I think it was just too overstuffed and overcrowded for me, so that's why I didn't quite make my top 10 overall. But shout out to it being Logan's number 9 and Cameron's number 5. Logan, hit me with your number 5.
My number 5 movie for the year, it might be on one of y'all's, but I would say it's unlikely to be on Trevor's. My number 5 movie for the year is Nosferatu.
Nope.
Yeah. I didn't. Again, I was pretty confident it wasn't on Trevor's.
Yeah.
I will say to Trevor that it is less a horror film than sort of a like moody, atmospheric film. There's really only like one or two like jump scares. I think Nosferatu's great because I've seen few movies capture the feeling of a like malevolent dread better than Nosferatu, right? This kind of stalking horse following you throughout the night, and just kind of getting ever closer. I think Bill Skarsgård is really great as Nosferatu, Count Orlok. Like he's just incredible. Nicholas Hoult I like a lot as well. Ironically, the piece I'm the most unsure about is Lily Rose Depp's performance.
I I've heard that a few times in the context of this movie.
I think I like her. It's like that's very much where I'm at. It's like I think I like her in it, but I'm not 100% sure. And she's doing. It's really interesting because in some ways she's sort of siloed off just by the nature of Nosferatu's story, and so she's not necessarily interacting with the larger cast in the same way for good chunks of this, right? It sort of follows Nicholas Holt's character. I think the entire scene and like sequence of Nicholas Holt's character at Count Orlok's castle about midway through the movie is like the standout sequence of the entire film for me. I think that entire like probably 10 to 15 minute stretch of the movie is just exceptional like horror filmmaking. And there's not, I guess there's one jump scare in that, but really it's just all like atmosphere. It's all sound design. It's all lighting. It's all how it's staged, right? Robert Eggers just lets his cast just sink into the darkness of that castle. And the sound design is exquisite, from like hearing curtains blow to the creak of floorboards to kind of, characters like panting as they try to run or have sex. It's a very horny movie. It is a very, very horny movie. But yeah, it's just this incredible sequence in Count Orlok's castle that kind of is just slowly building and building and building to this kind of explosive kind of sequence. And it's incredible. And the fear on Nicholas Hoult and how he's able to convey with basically no dialogue, just like his eyes and his face and his body reactions and just like the sweat that's pouring down from him. I think it's an incredible bit of just like horror filmmaking. And the film kind of resets after that and takes kind of, it starts building back up again, but I don't think it ever hits that height again. It's great. The cast of characters around them all are really interesting. I think Willem Dafoe, giving him yet another shout out on this podcast, is excellent. I think he's absolutely excellent as basically the Van Helsing type character in Nosferatu, and is slightly unhinged and mad, but also clearly brilliant and just this like fantastic character that's like injected into the film in the third act. And yeah, I think Nosferatu's really great and special. And I didn't know what to expect. I'm not the biggest horror fan, but I think there's just such great filmmaking technique on display here, from audio design and visual standpoint and cinematography, and the performances are so great throughout that yeah, Nosferatu really just kind of like floored me. And it's also a movie, probably unsurprising considering that the original Nosferatu is basically the creator of the horror film as we know it, and still talked about as one of the scariest movies ever made, that it's a movie that really sticks with you after you watch it as well. You were sort of like seeing shadows in the dark for a day or two afterwards. And so yeah, Nosferatu is my number 5. It's really great.
Nice.
My
number 5 to wrap us up here. Maybe if you saw this, Logan, I don't know. We Live in Time. This is basically a two-hander with Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh.
Yeah.
They basically are a couple that, this movie is wildly melodramatic in terms of like the things that happen in their love story are incredibly over the top and oftentimes silly or oftentimes very, very serious. Their initial meet cute is Florence Pugh hits him with a car,
right?
And she takes him to the hospital, and that's what kicks off their romance and relationship together. There's a birth that happens in the bathroom of a 7-Eleven, basically, or a convenience store. Just wild and like absurd things in terms of like, oh, none of this would ever really happen, but the two of them are playing it so straight, and their chemistry, much like the Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt chemistry, is so wonderful together. They are delightful. We see the course of their relationship, and the tragedy of the film is that Florence Pugh's character is basically diagnosed with a terminal cancer, and so it's struggling with what that means for the family, what that means for her personal desires, what that like how Andrew Garfield's Tobias character and their young daughter are going to kind of cope and deal. The biggest issue I had with this movie was the framework of it. Similar to like I had the issue with Saturday Night being, hey, let's do it the 90 minutes before, showtime. This has a framework that is akin to 500 Days of Summer until it's not. Whereas like the first half of the movie is happening kind of all at a time and in a very jumbled sequence, and we're seeing bits at the middle of the relationship, then we go back to the beginning of the relationship, then we're like super far into the relationship, and we're just kind of bouncing all over time in their relationship without really having a rhyme or reason to why. And then at some point in the movie it kind of abandons that, and we go into a much more linear to the end of the story kind of sequence of events. And so I think if it didn't have that oddball framework, I would like this movie better. And so I think that's like partly on the script in terms of how that was kind of chopped up, but the movie itself, like I look at this movie and I saw it, and like I see absolutely why Andrew Garfield signed on to do this movie. Obviously, in recent years, he's had a lot of kind of press and a lot of time talking about his grief and the grief of losing his mother. And so this very much feels like he was personally taking on this role to examine that grief and what it looks like in terms of losing a partner in the Florence Pugh character. And then the Florence Pugh side of things, like she is, an overachieving. She is a chef that is like, when they meet on the verge of opening her, restaurant and trying to basically, join the Olympics of cooking, or is kind of what her arc entails over the course of the film, but doing that while struggling with ovarian cancer and the selfishness of wanting to do that because that's a memory that she wants to have and do, and not just be a dead girl's or a girl's dead mother kind of thing. And she's trying to create like her own legacy, and what does that legacy mean as they're facing kind of her mortality. Beautiful story between the two of them that I think just struggles because we jump all over the place. I talked about it when I reviewed it on that Nerdy Site show, because it likes to jump around like that. The movie likes to have like the high point of tension without having to actually commit to any kind of like the hard part of the resolution. Like, like that's a really shitty thing you've just done, but we don't have to sit in it because we're going to jump to another part of their story when, the actual ramifications have long since passed. And what does that mean for this couple? It kind of cheats by not actually having to commit to those really hard moments that it sets up and then cowers away from. But it's an incredible two-hander between Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. Yeah. Both of them are top of their game, and it's definitely a movie that will make you feel things, even amidst the like very over the top, very melodramatic stakes that sometimes are hitting for these two characters. But yeah, just delightful, and just I continue to love the things that both of those two are doing independently, and getting to see them kind of pair up in this movie together was a lot of fun, and a lot of heartbreak, but intentionally so. So
beautiful.
We Live in Time just hits my top 5. So now we dive into our number 4s. Cameron, let's move back to you for your number 4 movie of the year.
My number 4 movie of the year is Sonic the Hedgehog 3.
Ooh. Alrighty. Is this anywhere in your list, Logan?
It is not anywhere higher. No.
It is. Yeah, it was I think the last of my honorable mentions at this point. Yeah, like fun movie, but I was just like, no, I did not like it enough to crack my top 10. But here it is at Cameron's number 4. So
all right, hit us with it, Cam.
Why is this your number 4 movie of the year?
This is my number 4 movie of the year because this is Sonic. The Sonic
because
movies,
holy shit, they did it.
Yeah, holy shit, they did it. It really is that. That's the aspect of it. That's the factor. Sonic continues to be the best video game adaptation of all time. Sonic 1, with a completely original story, introduces a real-world universe that they just absolutely nail.
Yeah.
Sonic 2 has some things that people don't like about it. I recently rewatched it. I found that it was such a delight, such a good film. I am a fan of the human aspect of it, which is the detriment that a lot of people have for it. Sonic 3 is, and like going back over it and like really like going back over clips and kind of like, the fun TikTok trends that have come out of it, particularly with the Robotnik dance, laser dance that they do, has been just such a fun thing to come out of it. But just the fact that it's Sonic Adventure 2 as a movie, and they make it work, and it's really, really fantastic. Like, it turns into a CGI fest at the end of the movie, but it is a good CGI fest. It works. Has like a very touching send-off for Robotnik. That is, I shouldn't say touching. It has a decent enough send-off for Robotnik. That still plays into, this is a villain. This is not a good person. But there are people that matter, that this person matters to. And it does its own thing. I think it really is a great, like, if this is the only trilogy of films we get out of the Sonic films, that's great.
Well, they already have.
I know they already
slated for 2027. So.
I know, but if that falls through or whatever, like something happens, okay. But like this was a brilliant kind of like bookend to the trilogy of the Sonic films. And if they want to end it here, they can, and it's fantastic. If they want to continue on, great too. Just what a spectacular and like splendid film to enjoy as a video game fan, as somebody who, I'm not a Sonic sicko, but I do enjoy the Sonic. I enjoyed the Sonic games when I was younger. Getting to see this sort of like evolution of getting to see also like, and this is also my opinion, is also impacted by my friends who are Sonic sickos, who have been living their best life.
Gotta go
fast.
This
movie coming out. You got to go fast, and this movie nails that. It never stops. It never slows its pace. It just delivers on the story that it wants to tell and nails it throughout the entire thing. I think the reason this is so high up on my list is the delivery of this movie. The way this movie delivers on what it is, what its premise is what it nails, and that's why it's so high up on my list. Also, like recency bias. Saw it just a little bit ago.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I like.
Oh, we saw it in IMAX too, didn't we?
No. I don't think so.
What did we see in Cine Capri?
I mean, yeah. Well, Cine Capri is not IMAX.
Sure, it's not IMAX, but yeah, we watched it. We watched it in a very nice theater. That definitely helped with the splendor that was this movie.
Yeah, so, like Sonic 3 was fun. I enjoyed it better than I enjoyed Sonic 2 because it's not that I dislike the human aspect of the Sonic films. It's that there was a whole second act that was just a weird marriage subplot of the second film that it was like, this does nothing for me. Like, let's get back to Sonic and Tails and Knuckles. But yeah, like Keanu Reeves as Shadow is a lot of fun in this one. Jim Carrey still doing his Jim Carrey thing, and your mileage may vary on that. I thought he went too into Count Olaf territory on this one, so didn't quite work for me. But absolute shout out to Agent Stone, who is like, low-key an MVP of those three movies, having like the weird heart for his, unrequited love or whatever servitude for Robotnik. Definitely a lot of fun in that character. And yeah, watching Sonic 3, I was like, oh, there are so many great moments in here that are like, here's the freeze frame for the Sonic sickos. They absolutely nail those moments for the people that like are that target audience. But as somebody who played Sonic 1, 2, 3, and then Sonic Mania, and that's my lineage with Sonic, this just didn't crack my top 10. But Glad you loved it so much there, Cameron. So Logan, hit us with your number 4 movie of the year.
My number 4 movie for the year is the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare by Guy Ritchie, starring Henry Cavill.
Not surprised it's here.
I wondered. I put together like because of how the tally works in the doc in the Google sheet. I put together like, here are the movies that like may pop up in here, and Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare is one that I had in here as like, okay, I know Cameron and I didn't see it, but Logan mentioned it, so yeah, this will probably come up in his list. So yeah, tell us why this one is your number 4.
Yeah, I think it's. I like Guy Ritchie a lot, right? So right at the gate, it's doing that well. I think that it just knows how to be a great action adventure movie. Obviously, the time period is great. Who doesn't love Nazis as the villains? Guy Ritchie takes delight in finding new and creative ways to absolutely fucking murder them all. And there are some particularly spectacular, killings. But it's the ensemble cast. It's just a great ensemble. Henry Cavill is absolutely unhinged in this movie. And is a ton of fun. In a lot of ways, this is a better tryout to be the next James Bond than Argyle is. And Henry Cavill is just having a ball, basically, and just chewing up scenery, doing great. But it's a lot of the cast around him that I think is equally great. I mean, Alan Richardson steals the show in this thing as like this like Danish like homicidal maniac who with like a very sweet Lilton voice, and he's just brilliant. And I think Henry Golden's in this and is very good as well. And I think it's a movie that obviously is based on a true story. Ian Fleming is involved at a certain point. It's allegedly part of the inspiration for what would develop into the Bond series in 007 is Ian Fleming's adventures around this time period and these characters. And so that's all very interesting. But it's just such a like exhilarating, intense, like colorful, explosive, musical, epic in a very real way. It feels like that. It feels epic. And it is just this kind of like slow simmer and these like moments of explosion. The cast is all knows exactly what kind of movie they're in. It's a ton of fun. It's very engaging. We're at the point in my list now where really numbers 2, 3, and 4 all kind of bleed together. This one ultimately got put at number 4, but it is absolutely great. I think it's a ton of fun. And I think everyone should watch The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare because I think it's a great time and you'll have a great time with it. And it deserves more, I think, eyeballs on it. But yeah, that is my number 4.
Nice. My number 4, I think, probably still going to be a little bit higher, at least on your list, Logan. I don't think Cameron saw it. Dune Part 2 is my number 4.
It is higher on my list, yeah.
Yeah, so we will circle back to that in a bit. So then let's dive into our top 3. Cameron, hit me with your number 3 movie of the year.
My number 3 movie is Inside Out 2.
Inside Out 2. That is also my number 3. So we'll double up on this one. I'm guessing you didn't catch it, Logan?
I've never seen Inside Out 1.
All right.
Oh, there you go.
Then, talk about Inside Out 2 here, Cam.
Sure. Like we've podcasted it a couple of times. There's that D Plus show on it, so I don't know if there's much to say that hasn't already been said by the two of us on it. But this is obviously this is the number 1 movie of the year. There's a reason for that. Or for the last year.
Yeah. It's the highest.
Oh, wow.
I don't know that. It delivers on a promise I didn't know Inside Out 1 had, which was seeing the continued development of Riley as a character, getting to see as, I will say as somebody who suffers from anxiety, this is the best example of anxiety that I've ever seen in a film. To the point where there's an actual spiraling moment that Riley has that is made me feel so seen in a way I was not expecting when I saw this movie. and seeing it again for like the second time, like, you know, it's just overall as a film, it is a really like great solid film. Joy and sadness, kind of being, you know, in the first film it's joy and sadness on their journey together, and this one it's really all of the emotions and their journey as they're moving forward. And like traversing and showing us more about like what makes the mind work in Inside Out. We get to see more of what was kind of teased a little bit. We get to go to like the subconscious and like what does it mean when there's like the kind of pillars that we saw introduced in the first film, they're introduced in the first film, are kind of shown as being like, yeah, these are the things that are consciously that we see, but what are the memories that make those up? And where do those sit? When they go into long storage, where do they go? And how do they become these touchstone memories for Riley in developing as a person, emotionally as much as it is just, you know, mentally? It just does a beautiful job of capturing also Riley as kind of a solo act on her own. Like, parents aren't really showing up in this one very much. And so it really is way more focused on what does it mean to be a teenager. It's a, you know, modern film showing us that, you know, this is I would say this is one of the best looks at, I can't really say as an authority, but I assume is one of the best looks at what it means to be an American teenager in the Bay Area. It captures a like feeling of what does it mean when you separate from friends, the anxiety of being kind of like alone and the pressure that comes from needing to perform, what it means to need to perform, what it means to meet those expectations that you have for yourself, not that anybody else has for you. And it's has some like really brutal, rough moments. But I think that overall it's a really stellar film. Not my favorite film of the year, but definitely like understandably number one film box office wise.
Yeah, my number 3 as well. It's a great, not necessarily return to form for Pixar, because I think I've enjoyed a lot of their recent output, but certainly this one I think resonated with like the audience much more than some of their recent outputs, maybe even like since pre-pandemic kind of stuff. Hence why, this was the number one movie of 2024 at the box office. I think it does, as you said, Cam, it does a great job of building on what got introduced and the ideas introduced in the first Inside Out, and then kind of building upon that in terms of like the new things introduced here of like, yeah, these are the things that craft Riley's sense of self. And if happiness and joy is constantly trying to, you know, cater that to one particular thing, that's going to create a version of Riley that isn't necessarily like the full inclusive. And so if anxiety comes in and tries to do the same thing, that can kind of also be messy. And I like that it kind of examines, you know, the swath of emotions on that front. Plus it has a lot of fun, just, you know, we get a brainstorm manifested. We get probably the best gag of the movie in the sarcasm, where it is a chasm that rips in Riley's brain, and anything you say across it ends up sounding sarcastic. So just such like silly humor there. Weird like references and like very niche callbacks to the first movie that were like right up my alley, because especially because we had rewatched Inside Out 1 in the lead up to Inside Out 2 and did that D+ show on it. I think, as you said, Cam, this is such a great look at the anxiety and what going through that can feel like. In a way, I loved hearing stories that like kids who grew up with Inside Out used Inside Out terminology or used the colors of the emotions to tell their family, I'm feeling blue today, or I'm feeling red, or I'm feeling green, or I'm feeling yellow, to kind of represent who those characters were. And so kids getting to walk away from this, continuing to get new language that they can use to help express what they're going through in terms that, you know, our generation didn't necessarily have. I think is all the better for the society growing up. And yeah, I love the fact that this is like, I got excited at the prospect that is teased at the end of the first Inside Out of okay, Riley's a teenager, and we see the inside of a boy's brain, and it's all on fire or whatever. And like what puberty might mean. And I like that it's introduced here not as like Riley having crushes on boys or anything like that, but it is, she's got her group of her two best friends, and they're going off to this hockey camp as like one last hurrah. They shouldn't know going into it that it's their one last hurrah, but finding out that they're going to be going to a different school next year, and so that does make her very isolated. And what does that mean? And this putting all of herself into trying to succeed here, and doing that at the expense of her relationship with her friends, or what is that dynamic? This very much ended up being like as interesting a Riley story as it was the things that are going on in Riley's head. And I really enjoyed that. Absolutely. So
when she has a breakdown and she dyes her hair, and it's like, I'm like, yep. I'm like, I personally have not gone through that, but I have seen that happen to so many people. That is a thing. And I'm like, I see it, I recognize it. And a lot of my friends, female friend, femme friends have said 100%, like, you are having an anxiety attack. You're spiraling, you're breaking down. What do? You dye your hair. And it's like, it's a great scene because it's built up so well. And then it's just like, and you're just like waiting for like the fallout from it the entire time.
Yeah. All right. So that's Inside Out 2, both mine and Cameron's number 3. So Logan, hit us with your number 3.
My number 3 film for the year is Lapta Ladies, which is
I have no idea what that is. So go ahead.
Is a Hindi language film on Netflix as well. It is exceptional. It is ostensibly, the TLDR is a groom and his new bride board a train. She's wearing a face covering. And so they board a train to get back to his village and his family. During the night, he's seated next to another recently married husband and bride and grabs the wrong bride's hand, takes her with him to the village, and then it's revealed he's got the wrong bride. How could you lose your bride? You're so stupid. And the hijinks that ensue. What's really great about it is that it blends comedy and drama really well together, romance and hope and despair, serious issues and very silly issues together. There's kind of a Mayberry-esque police constable and his deputy who are kind of investigating some stolen jewelry as well to figure out what's going on there, and their hijinks ensue. But it's really just a beautiful film. It's gorgeously shot. It is one of the most beautiful looking movies of the year, I think. It's just kind of got these really gorgeous vistas of the Indian countryside and city life. So it's really beautiful to look at. It's got a really stellar soundtrack and music throughout, interwoven. It's not a Bollywood movie. It's a smaller independent film. And so there are no big dance numbers in that sense, but the music they use is really exceptional, I think. And it just has such a big beating heart. It was India's nominee for Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars. And it's just, I think, really exceptional. I think all of the core 3 big performances of the film are just amazingly done. Me and Shravya both loved watching the film. And the journey it takes you on, I think. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. I think it's genuinely one of the highlights of the entire film. I watched 126 movies this year, like I said, and this would probably be, in my top 20 films easily of the entire film of all kind that I watched. It's really special, I think, and really lovely. And, I think it is emotionally affecting in both these kind of grand ways and also in much more quietly small touching ways. Yeah, as I ended my Letterboxd review, is not this movie making me and my wife tear up 2 weeks into our marriage, right? So we also watched it at a great time too. But it's just a really beautiful love story and family story and feminist story, and kind of taken your destiny into your own hands. And I think it's really great. I think it's really special. Again, it's on Netflix, so all of you can watch it. Just like with Tilu 2, it's not long. It's at the most, it's somewhere between 2 hours to 2.5 hours, I would say. So it's not like it's a 3.5 hour Bollywood film. And I think it's
Looks like it's another 2 hours, 2 minutes.
Yeah, and it's just like a really lovely film. Like that is sort of the word that constantly comes back to me when I think of Lapta Ladies. It's just like, it's just really lovely to experience the story that it tells. And its depictions of sort of so many different diverse aspects of Indian life, included in sort of the more impoverished areas of India, and some of the wealthy areas of India and everything in between. So it is my number 3 favorite movie of the year. Again, like I said, for the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, my number 2, number 3, number 4 movies kind of constantly went back and forth. If you asked me a different day, if I were to write up my top 10 movies even, I might put this at number 2, depending on the day. But right now I have it at number 3 for my favorite movies of the year.
All right. Excellent. Then we will dive into our number 2s. Speaking of, Cameron, hit me with your number 2 movie of the year.
My number 2 is Deadpool and Wolverine.
All righty. Let's chat Deadpool and Wolverine.
We did a That D Plus show for this. We've talked about it in before. Once again, this is another one that we've done as part of podcasts, multiple. So I won't dive too deep into it, but I felt that this film for me is like very much a love letter to me as a Deadpool fan. As somebody who grew up reading, from the time I was a teenager, I was reading the Deadpool comic series. I lucked my way into a collection of like everything that Deadpool's ever been in, up through like 2008, before he really started his modern run that is like he's become very popular from. And so getting to see throughout this trilogy of films, the facets of Deadpool from his different eras really come through in different ways. This one is definitely the most modern Deadpool that he's ever been. We get to see the introduction of where does the Fox movie, like X-Men movie canon fit into the Marvel universe. And it's like, well, this is the multiverse it's a part of. We get that answered. We get to see a return to Wolverine for Hugh Jackman. That is not I shouldn't say, they definitely desecrate the ending of Logan. 100% they desecrate it intentionally to basically be like, yeah, we are bringing him back. So what? Like, this is it. Like, the one you wanted, he's still dead, so don't worry about it. And do it in the best way possible. The way that this film takes flight over the course of its runtime to being just such a love letter and a send-off to the Fox Marvel universe. Whether it's bringing Chris Evans in to say goodbye to the Fantastic Four franchise, whether it's bringing in the first Sabretooth, bringing back Toad, Ray Park as Toad, bringing in Pyro, a bigger character in 2 and 3 of the X-Men movies, and just being like a very beautiful send-off to all of that, has been like in the only way that Deadpool can be a beautiful send-off, by just ferociously mocking it and just like burying its legacy, but at the same time in a way uplifting it, getting to see a send-off for Elektra, Blade, making Channing Tatum's dream come true by letting him be Gambit. It really just is a love letter to the movies I grew up with, the franchises I love, and giving us a very satisfying ending. If we don't get another Deadpool movie, it's okay. This one was fantastic. But we now have this backdoor answer to where are the mutants in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The ones we know of are in this universe. So, and it has been, quote unquote, saved.
Yeah. Deadpool and Wolverine, a lot of fun. It was, as I said, my number 7. I think, I mean, all the fun, joyous little things you touched on there already. My biggest, like, the thing that, like, weakened the movie for me was that it sacrifices the Deadpool cast of characters
definitely
for the Fox cast of characters that we get. And I was more invested in the Deadpool cast of characters than admitted. Like, I've maybe seen the original Fantastic Four movie once. I never saw Silver Surfer. I never saw Fan Four Stick. And the X-Men movies, just like they wore so thin by the end that I still haven't seen the Dark Phoenix
I haven't
last
either.
one.
Nope, never. I don't think any of us have.
And
Next time on that D Plus show.
yeah.
No,
We talked about it, and no. We just didn't want to even bother.
because then that brings up the question of New Mutants, and we don't want to watch that either.
Yeah, either.
So.
So yeah, the while there's a lot of fun to be had there, and in this meta contextual sense of like, yeah, the Green Day, you know, credits bit of Time of Your Life playing while we see a lot of behind the scenes footage of the Fox, you know, Marvel movies. Interesting, but also it just I wish there had been more care for the, like, I wish that it didn't have to come at the expense of the other Deadpool characters and the Deadpool cast, and like some of it just being completely not explained at all in terms of like why Cable or Domino aren't back for this one. No real reason given apart from we wanted to spend the budget on all these other people instead. That said, very fun villain in Emma Corwin's I forget the Charles Xavier's sister. Loved the like visual styling of like their hands going into people's brains. The guy from Succession is very fun as Paradox, being just like the snivelly little dick at the TVA. And yeah, they're like
Cassandra Nova is the character, by the way.
Thank you, Cassandra Nova. Thank you. Lots of fun combat, lots of fun fight scenes over the course. And yeah, a little bit goes back to what we talked about with like Red One of like, yeah, there's no stakes because you know that Deadpool and Wolverine can't die in their fights with one another, but they take that, know that, and say, we're going to have some fun with this, and we're going to throw them into a Hyundai, whatever.
Honda Odyssey,
and we're going to have them just do a crazy fight in there, or we're going to just have them go balls to the wall and stabbing each other and shooting each other, knowing that they can't die, and they'll just do this until they're exhausted and worn out, and then other enemies come into the play. Or you get the incredible oneer alongside the Madonna Like a Prayer number. There's a lot of fun to be had in that sequence. So definitely visually stunning fun in this one. Even if I wish that it had been more of a Deadpool movie as opposed to a Deadpool and Wolverine movie. But also lots of great cameos. We got the Cavalrine was a fun bit so in good. There, shouting out to our third Henry Cavill mention of the episode. So yeah, absolutely fun with Deadpool and Wolverine there.
I think Deadpool is so interesting to me because they're just movies that don't work for me.
Sure.
Because I think it was last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sure, I mean, you can pull up in like 10 seconds, I'm sure. But at one point, whenever I watched Deadpool, the original one, in the last like year or two, and I watched it and was like, oh man, that's a pretty good 2012 movie, 2011 movie. And then you were like, that's from 2016, and I was like, oh, okay. Well then, hang on, let me revise my thoughts on that movie. And yeah, like, they're just movies that I feel like in a lot of ways, like their sense of humor and their jokes and their style fit from like a decade plus ago, and not from like the 8 years ago that they are being made in, or 6 years, or 5 years, or 4 years, or a year ago now. And so, I like that Ryan Reynolds has gotten to do this, and it's the character he's always wanted to make these movies for, and he's done this trilogy now. And so they're like this weird thing of like, I really appreciate that they exist, and I'm happy for Ryan Reynolds, but they just don't click for me as well as I would have liked them to. And Wolverine, I mean, obviously, I love Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. It is such a definitive portrayal of that character. And I know what they did, and I know what anyone who disagrees with me will tell me. And having said that, no amount of magic waving it away, it's a different universe, will make me be like, cool, this makes how Logan ended any better. It's like, that's such a perfect ending for that character. And I don't care if it's a different Wolverine. I don't care if it's a different universe. It's the same thing. And so that's such a perfect ending, which is also something we've said for another series at this podcast. But endings were a problem in 2024, apparently. But no, it's like, Logan was so good, I think. It's one of the greatest comic movies ever made, I think, right? And so...
they touch on that a bunch.
Oh yeah, I know they do. I know I've seen it, but it's like, it just doesn't change the core fact for me, right? It's like, I just think it's such a good ending that I don't need more of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. I don't need to see him take that role on again.
I think what you really want to say is you don't want him to do it anymore.
Yeah, I don't need him more. I don't need that. I had my ending, right? I mean, again, there's an element of me with Deadpool and Wolverine, both from when it was announced to it being made to seeing it to 6 months after its release, whatever it is now, 7 months after its release, where it is just sort of like, and Trevor will probably laugh at me at this point, where I'm just going to say, just let things end, right? Like, just like, this is in a lot of ways, this is my episode 9 argument, right? Well, I'll sit on my horse and say, episode 6 is a perfect ending for that trilogy and for those characters. I don't need more from them, especially done like episode 9 is going to handle them. Right? Like, Skyfall really is a perfect ending for the Daniel Craig run of Bond films. I don't need Spectre and then No Time to Die and what they go in that direction, right? Just like, both Indiana Jones films, which I probably enjoy more than most Indiana Jones fans, I'm still like, Last Crusade is a perfect ending for that. I don't need more, right? And so there's just there's a part of me that recognizes that we're in this era of we're remaking everything and we're letting everything keep going and we can't let anything end. And I recognize that, but I can also still say, while waving my cane in the air, that just let things end. And that's sort of my thought with Deadpool Wolverine, mixed with, I don't think the Deadpool movies are 100% for me. There are certain bits I like, and again, there are definitely moments in this of Leonardo DiCaprio playing the TV being like, oh shit, that's cool. But on the whole, I think as a trilogy, I think the first one's probably the strongest to me. But yeah, I think they're movies that maybe just don't click for me, and that's okay. Again, I'm happy they exist because Ryan Reynolds had this like passion for so long, obviously.
Yep. All right. What is your number 2 movie of the year, Logan? I know what your top 2 are. I just don't know what order they're in at this point.
This is a big reveal. It might be higher on someone else's list. My number 2 movie for the year is going to be Dune Part 2.
I don't think Cam saw it.
Okay, we didn't see it.
It was my number 4. So
okay,
we will talk Dune Part 2 right now.
So Dune Part 2.
I did have them. Oh, I penciled some things in, and I did have the top 2 right. And unless Cameron has completely forgotten a movie, I know what his number 1 is going to be. Too,
yeah,
so.
Obviously, yeah. But I will say, as somebody who's read Dune Messiah, Emperor of Dune, all of that, you can feel free to jump in as much spoilers as you want. I know what happens.
Oh, you shouldn't. Okay.
I'm not like, I haven't seen the movie, I don't know what happens. I read the books years ago.
We don't need to get.
I'm good.
But like, I think, and I'll be curious to talk to you about this, Trevor, because it's been so long since we've talked about Dune now at this point, because it came out in the spring. Dune Part 2 to me is a really interesting movie because it is, in some ways, it's a movie that I'm really floored by, while also being a movie that I don't necessarily enjoy watching, right? Like, it's not a fun movie, if that makes sense. It's a very dark kind of Shakespearean tragedy that you're watching unfold in a lot of ways. And so I think the first movie is definitely a lighter, more kind of fun, time. And that's what makes Dune Part 2 really tricky, I think, in a lot of ways. To get to the easy stuff first, I think the performances across the board are fantastic. I think Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya in particular are just phenomenal in this film. They're given incredible performances. And Zendaya is doing it with very little dialogue in this movie. I mean, she is doing it with just her eyes and her shoulders and kind of the look of resignation on her face. But even Timothée Chalamet's performance, I think, almost weirdly isn't talked about that much, I think, in the ways that I think he's great, right? I think this is a character who is fighting so intensely with his destiny and sort of where he's being pushed by everyone from every single side that he doesn't want. And to see those kind of jostling forces and to see these things and to see, I think, the reality that in another world, in another universe, in another timeline, to go back to Deadpool Wolverine for a second, that, like, you know, Paul Atreides and Zendaya's character just end up in a happily ever after scenario where they don't go down this route. And I think that makes it even more tragic, I think, and even more heartbreaking, that it is just sort of all of these, in a lot of ways, external forces just shuffling him down this corridor until he basically just, almost with utter resignation and fury at the decision that's being foisted on him, accepts it and just goes full throttle, right? Like, Paul Atreides as a character, I think, is very much Shakespearean tragic. And, you know, it's really interesting to view this character who technically saves the day, I guess, but at a horrific cost. And, you know, the consequences of being the hero, but what is unleashed by your actions and the actions and consequences and the dominoes that fall because of it is really interesting to see. I think the finale sequence, that whole last like 20 to 30 minute sequence, is just some of the best action battle sequences I think I've ever seen in a movie. I think the final duel between Paul Atreides and Austin Butler's character, and like the lighting and the framing of that, and just like the sunlight petering through, is just some of the most visually beautiful images I've seen put on film this year. I mean, in general, Dune Part 2, it very easily might be one of the most beautiful films I've seen in the last couple of years. I mean, you know, which is not shocking if anyone has seen Blade Runner 2049. I mean, Denis Villeneuve has an eye for filmmaking and gets great cinematographers to work with him. But I mean, it is just beautiful. Look at the, you know, like the sandworm sequence and the writing on that is incredible. I've talked about it for a couple of other films, but the sound design on this film and how like intense and epic and it drills into your brain almost is really, really great. And then, yeah, I think for me, the biggest kind of final note I'll say before I kind of hand it over to Trevor is I love how sad this movie is. I love how this movie wallows in it. I love how this movie sits in it. I love how this movie rests in it. From its opening beats, this movie is a tragedy and is taking its journey. And that sort of makes it really beautiful to me. It is basically 2.5 hours of Paul and a couple of the characters desperately, frantically trying to not get sucked into this black hole. And there's absolutely nothing that they can do to avoid it by the end of the film. And the last act in particular, I think, just really sets you up for this. And it is a great examination, I think, in a lot of ways, like good Shakespeare of, which is all Shakespeare, I guess, but like Shakespeare of, you know, what are you willing to sacrifice to achieve, you know, power? What are you willing to sacrifice to achieve the ends that you want? What are you willing to sacrifice to achieve victory? And in the process of achieving those things, do you sacrifice not just your love, but do you sacrifice the very just cause that you were kind of advocating for? And do you sacrifice your very soul and humanity, right? And I think Dune Part 1 and 2 is a rare instance, I think, where splitting that story into two benefits that story. It just gives you more time with these characters, more time in that world, more time to feel these themes. So by the time the end credits roll in Dune Part 2, you've gone on this like 5 to 6 hour journey with these characters. And I think it just hits that much harder. So it is my number 2 movie for the year. I think it's an incredible cinematic achievement.
Yeah. So yeah, my number 4, and going back to like Furiosa, like if like Dune Part 2 is everything I wish Furiosa had been in terms of like cinematic look,
I agree.
practicality. When the CG is used, it's used effectively here in Dune Part 2. And it is, you touched on so many things that I just kind of echo 100%. But in particular, like this was probably among the most visually stunning movies I saw this year. From a like, and it's impressive given that like this could very easily be written off as but it's just a all in a desert world kind of thing, and it's still like the way you shoot on that desert world and the scale of shooting the characters in the frame and making Paul Atreides incredibly small in the grand world that he's in, or I mean especially when you do go to the Harkonnen world and you get the Fade Routha scene, and it is all
white,
like this gray, the black and white grayscale kind of thing, because that's how the sun looks in that part of the galaxy. And these weird like flourishes that they give of, hey, instead of fireworks they have like ink blots that shoot out into the sky, and it's like, oh, that's a really cool physical aesthetic kind of beat. But yeah, this is one where there's a lot of characters in this, but they get the time that they need, and nobody feels like they're short shrift. Maybe you could say Léa Seydoux' character, but even that I feel like is, that's a character that's probably going to play some sort of larger role in Dune Messiah, or Florence Pugh's character here. Like knowing their role within this story versus like the wider story doesn't diminish them in this particular movie. And I think everybody is firing on all cylinders here, not the least of which is Denis Villeneuve and like his artistic collaborators in terms of the show. You talk about the sound design, like not only like the big bombastic sound design, but also the silent moments of this. In particular, like the haunting image that is coming to my mind is when Paul and his mom are kind of on the run from the Harkonnens at the early, sequence, and the Harkonnens are like using their jetpacks to, come into play, and the Stilgar's people just sniping them, and just like there's this like eerie silence as they try and get the jump on everybody, and then just the falling and the thuds of bodies hitting the sand, or the rhythm of the thumpers to call the sandworm, like the obviously the big bombastic like the iconic like soundscape of this film is just like magical in terms of it. Like Dune Part 1, I believe I don't think I saw in theaters. I saw, I believe, only on HBO, because it did like it was in that era where it's like, hey, pandemic's happening, so we're going to do this day and date, release it on HBO Max. And I watched it on HBO Max and was like, oh, this is phenomenally, astounding. Seeing this on the big screen was like a not quite religious experience, but like I would get people saying it's a religious experience because of like this is one I'm trying to remember if I went and actually made the effort to go see it in IMAX, and I think I did.
You did go see it.
I know.
That's right. Yeah, I went and saw it at Arizona Mills to see it in IMAX and see it on the biggest screen possible, and well worth it. And just incredible visuals for this, and
the reason I haven't seen it on HBO Max, I'm honestly just waiting until it gets another screening on some screen somewhere because I want to see it in that way that I think it should be seen in first.
Yeah. Great performances all around. Javier Bardem is so fun as Stilgar in this, of like the over the top zealot who is like completely bought into Paul's mythos, and it's played for laughs in how truthfully he believes everything that he's espousing. Austin Butler, especially coming off of Elvis and like him kind of being stuck in that character for a couple years, him coming in here and being Feyd-Rautha and very distinctly basically mirroring Stellan Skarsgård to do that, and the fight scene that we get with them and his just vicious sadism is absolutely a lot of fun and a weird kind of joy to experience. And then as you touched on, like Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya doing so much with so little in their dialogue together, but building this heartbreaking love story that you know is doomed from the start, kind of thing. Absolutely a delight. And so shout out to Dune Part 2. I continue to think back on I love the sequence of them taking out one of the spice crawlers or whatever. And it is like them hiding behind the legs of it, and like the guerrilla warfare tactics that Paul brings into the fight against the Harkonnens, and that incredible shot of like we get the POV from the ornithopter, the Harkonnen ornithopter, that is like seeing the rocket that Zendaya has fired and like, oh, they got it, just in the nick of time, and boom, it just explodes. And you like, we don't see Zendaya shoot it, but we see the aftermath and we know what has happened, and the characters know what has happened and they know they're fucked. Is such a creative way to show the action in this that is just absolutely a delight. Absolute shout out to Dune Part 2.
I will also, just to touch on a lot of the things that you guys touched on, even though I haven't seen the film, as somebody who's read the book multiple times, such a great thing that Dune 1 ends on is it foreshadows everything that you see in Dune 2. The vision that he has in the tent, that he says, if I go down this path is definitively the most bloody, awful path I can go down, but I can't stomach not avenging my father. I can't stomach that my line, all this stuff, that the Atreides thing, the things that were impressed upon me that I was afraid to take up the mantle on of will be gone.
It's very Hamlet-esque. It's very Hamlet-esque.
It very much is. And it's always meant to be, Frank Hubert, who wrote the book, wanted the tale of Paul Atreides to be the warning of what a charismatic figure can be, whether that's charismatic politically or charismatic religiously.
And they're warning to themselves too, right? I mean, Paul himself is sort of scared by this own. I mean, he recognizes, I think, his own. He
does, because he sees himself,
right, and terror, right?
Yeah. The thing is, every decision he makes. Thought it was interesting that you said he's like being corridored into this, and it's like he knew that corridor, what it looked like before he went down it, and he still made the decision to go down it. That black hole that they're all trying to avoid, that's sucking them in, that sucks them in by the end. The resignation he has for it. That is because he made the decision when he decided that he was going to take control of the Fremen and do what he does in Dune Part 2. He knew the outcome. He knew the jihad, the genocide, everything that comes afterwards, everything that comes after it. He knew was going to be the end game for the decisions he was making. But he makes them anyway because for the sake of the love that he had for his father. And and he betrays everybody. He betrays every single person who trusts him and loves him in pursuit of this goal. Like you said, it's Hamlet-esque.
Loves him. And I think that is his own tragedy, right? I think really only Zendaya's character loves just Paul. Every other character around him has their own I mean, in some cases, very open machinations for using him. And his mother is among the most egregious in him. Like, she's using him as a pawn in her own machinations. It's really only Zendaya's character that isn't, and that makes that moment even more heartbreaking, right? I think, and their relationship even more tragic, because she's the only one who really sees him and for the person he is, right?
Yep. Fun note, in the first film, when they say Paul was supposed to be born a girl, the reason why he was supposed to be born a girl is because he was supposed to marry Austin Butler's character to continue that, like, for that lineage.
That is a
Paul
fun fact.
Paul being born a man is a selfish thing that the mother does for Leto, his father, because she's in love with him and she wants to give him his son. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, it sets off everything that happens. It comes back to the idea of selfishness of like what it like this idea of like society, like all goes back to that. But yeah, supposed to marry Austin Butler's character, and imagine the horrific future she would have had being married to that character. The Harkonnen are seen as totally fine in the Empire because it is a sick, twisted, nasty, gross universe, and Villeneuve did such a great job of presenting us with that.
Yep.
So I can't wait to see it eventually I see part 2 eventually, but yeah.
There you go. So my number 2 is The Wild Robot.
Oh, yeah.
This was an incredibly beautiful DreamWorks film this year that wowed me, and for a good chunk of the year was my number 1. Stimulating art style and like it's CG, but it's got like a watercolor feel to it. I haven't seen the Puss in Boots movie, but a lot of people made comparisons to the last Puss in Boots movie and the very watercolor vibes that it had. And this is it's a beautiful story of kind of a found family. It's this wild robot gets basically like crash lands on an uninhabited island sometime in the far future kind of situation, and they're service robots, so they seek out to do whatever they can for the community around them, and that community here just happens to be all sorts of wild animals. And in particular, Roz, played by Lupita Nyong'o, stumbles into a very Disney tropey kind of parents die kind of thing, and she is left to take care of the surviving little egg, which hatches into Bright Bill, a little duckling, and she basically she now has her mission. This duck has to survive to migration season, and they have to survive. They have to learn how to fly, and they have to basically get off this island so that they can migrate south for the winter. Pedro Pascal comes in as kind of a fox called Fink. And he's delightful in this. It's a great voice cast. Another Catherine O'Hara appearance. Shout out to her. She plays
her and Henry Cavill, the big stars of the year, apparently.
Yeah, she plays Pinktail, a worn down possum mother of many children, and there are some fun like playing possum gags that tie into that. But yeah, it's just such a beautiful, heartfelt story that. I'm surprised it kind of has even its own little second act. Like the way the movie is set up, you think, okay, when Bright Bill goes off and migrates south for the inevitable flight south for the winter, like that's the story done, and Roz will have completed her objective kind of thing, and she can go back to humanity. She can turn on her beacon to be picked up and sent home. But the movie, like that's basically just the first half of the movie. Then, we get to see what Roz looks like as kind of the empty nest, in this relationship, and how she has built up community with the animals around her who initially scorn her and kind of keep her at arm's length, but then ultimately find a way to embrace her. And yeah, just start to finish, this was a very touching. It nails the best of DreamWorks kind of sentimentality in, it's up there with your How to Train the Dragons kind of thing. It does all the things that Shrek does really, really well, but without relying on all sorts of silly pop culture references and stuff in this one. And it's just it's up there. Like, this would have been absolutely a perfect fit of a story. It is based on a book series, but it would have been a perfect fit for a Pixar style thing. But it just happens to be DreamWorks here, and they knock it out of the park, and had a great time with this one. So shout out to The Wild Robot, and I can't wait to see, assuming it did well enough and gets to do like part 2 of the series. I look forward to seeing where The Wild Robot goes from here. Because
absolutely,
really good.
It's one I want to check out. I know it's going to make people cry.
Yep. So diving in now to our number ones, and I believe Cameron and I are going to have the same number one.
I think
here.
so, yeah.
So I'm going to throw it to you first, Logan.
See, I'm curious
about your number one movie of the year.
Interesting. I'm curious what your number one movie of the year will be. My number one movie of the year is Monkey Man. Which I instructed both of you to watch. Monkey Man is my number one movie of the year. It's on Peacock, I think, so all of you can watch it afterwards. Monkey Man is Dev Patel's directorial debut. He also stars in the film. I don't have enough superlatives for it. I think Monkey Man is just exceptional. I think especially considering it is Dev Patel's directorial debut, I think it's incredible. He also co-wrote the film as well. I think it is a just towering performance and directorial debut. He's got a very keen eye for shot framing. His incorporation of music is really great, both narratively and then also just kind of lyrically that weave through the film. It is a visceral, bloody action film. There were a lot of cheap comparisons calling it basically Indian John Wick, but Dev Patel was much more inspired by like Southeast Asian cinema, particularly Hong Kong cinema. The works of like Bruce Lee, Jet Li, Jackie Chan is all very pronounced here. There's also a lot of Korean cinema influence in the film in terms of its action style, and something like The Raid is also very pronounced in the film. It's some of the best choreographed fight sequences I've ever seen in a movie. And I'm someone who's seen a lot of Hong Kong action cinema, as Cameron, I know at the very least, knows. And so it's just an incredible achievement. But I think in addition to all of the excellent ways it incorporates its visceral, bloody fight and choreography, is a really beautiful story woven in as well of a mother and his son. And the flashbacks the film uses to kind of go back to like the traumatic event that sort of incites everything, I think are woven the perfect amount to kind of slowly build things up into kind of the mid film kind of reveal that opens into the third act of like what exactly happened, how are all these characters connected. And I think it's brutal and dark and sad and tragic. And then I think the third act is just this explosive, adrenaline-fueled, emotionally draining sequence that builds and builds and builds and builds this final anticlimactic in a brilliant way moment between Dev Patel's character and kind of the big bad at the top of the tower. And it's just incredible. I think, I think it is a film that just imprints on you so well, and it is my favorite movie of the year. It was from the moment I saw it, and has remained that way all the way to the end of the year. It's one of my favorite movies of probably the past 5 years. If it had come out in 2023, it'd have been my favorite movie that year. And it's only when we get to stuff like Everything Everywhere All at Once and Parasite from the last like 5 or so years that we start to actually get to stuff that I think has had a similar impact on me. I think it's just incredible. It is a movie that is just beautiful and visceral, emotional and epic. It is intimate and of a grand scale. It is in so many ways a kind of mythological epic, but that places a deeply flawed and wounded human at its core, and you never forget the humanity of Dev Patel's character. And so, yeah, Monkey Man is my movie of the year. I think it's exceptional. Everyone should watch it.
I looked it up. It is not on Peacock, but it is on Amazon Prime.
It's on Prime,
Prime that you can.
There we go.
watch.
It was on Peacock. Now it's on Prime.
It debuted on Peacock, and then it moved to Prime.
Thank you. I think it's only like a little over 2 hours long. It's great.
We did talk about it back on episode 212 of that Movie Site show, back when Logan joined us, having recently watched Monkey Man early in the year, back in April.
It is great.
In our movie and gaming roundup episode at that time. It's one that I think strikes me as like probably a little violent for my taste.
It's definitely violent.
Why I've been
but it's great.
Averse to it, but I don't doubt that it's a solid movie. Absolutely.
Movies weren't the thing that I was spending my time trying to like get through this year.
Sure.
Games was definitely games and anime and a lot of other like mediums were kind of like where I spent my time, kind of like especially because like movies are such an easy way to eliminate hours upon hours of time if you're not careful. And I was trying to be as Trevor knows it because I was still here at the time. Was looking for work, and so it was not something that I was trying to stay. Trevor knows I was trying to stay as productive as possible to not fall into like any sort of like depressive loop. And movies, unfortunately, are like a gateway for me to fall into a depressive loop.
I think Cameron in particular, we talked about this on the pod back then.
Yeah,
and
it's the way you framed it as kind of like an urban mythological story.
Yeah,
is the thing that is intriguing to me the most. I think when you talked about it last time, it was like, oh, I'm interested. I'll check it out. Like, I'm sure I'll check it out. This time, you have definitely made the case that I'm like, okay, it's your number one movie of the year. I should probably give it a shot.
I also will say,
and then on top of that, what you explained it as. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in addition to like, I also think it's incorporation of like trans characters and trans identity issues within India and the trans community that it's at a huge core central part of the second act of the film. Is also just something that I think it's just really brilliantly done, I think, and really brilliantly handled. And there's some of the most effective sequences of the film and the way that they open up Dev Patel's character. And I think those are all things that you would really enjoy as well, Cameron. So I don't know. Everyone watch Monkey Man. I'll just keep talking about it.
Yeah. So unless Cameron has really thrown me for a loop and thrown something like Madam Web or Kraven the Hunter or Venom 3 in the mix, I'm pretty sure
about Venom 3, yeah.
Both of us are looking down the barrel at Wicked as our number one movie of
yes. 100% it is.
Sure.
Yes. So yeah.
That's surprising. Wicked, okay. All right.
Yeah,
shouldn't be. We're giant theater nerds.
I've seen it 3 times in theaters because I just very much like going into the movie. I was very reticent as somebody who loves the musical and got to see it in New York, back in 2005 when I went and spent a week in New York. Was concerned going into it because they had broken it out into 2 parts, and I was like, I don't know why you need to do that. I like tell the whole movie. It's going to be weird to like end this at the end of Act 1. But word of mouth was pretty good and everybody was really buzzing about performances. So I went and saw it, opening weekend, and immediately, absolutely loved it. Was, bawling my eyes out for a good chunk of the movie. Yeah. And basically like demanded that Cameron actually go and see it. And so we went and saw it a second time. Actually, that may have been my 3rd time seeing it when I saw it with Cameron.
It was the 3rd time. You saw it twice before that.
That's right. Yeah, because I saw it. I saw it.
You saw it twice. The second time, you're like, you need to go watch it. We are going to go see it.
Yeah, so. I saw it opening weekend, and then I saw it like the Tuesday before Christmas or something like that, or Monday before Christmas, just because I was like, I'm looking for something to do in the evening. And yeah, it's John Chu directed Crazy Rich Asians, directed In the Heights,
In
the
the Heights,
movie,
which is also
great. And he carries over the brilliant translation of a musical into a movie musical that he did within the Heights here in Wicked. And even though it's only the first half of the story, that just means that he was able to flesh out the world that we get here. There's not a ton of added stuff in part one here, but we get, grandiose establishing shots. We get transitions. We get to see Shiz University. We get to see Oz. We get to see the massive scope of Munchkinland and all these things in a way that if it had been, okay, we're going to do everything in a 3-hour movie, you would have lost a lot of that stuff. Performances are, incredible across the board, with maybe the slightest exceptions of Jeff Goldblum and Michelle Yeoh in terms of like their singing performances, but they're also just fucking great in terms of Madame Morrible and the Wizard, and what they're bringing to the table on that front. But really, you have Jonathan Bailey, who's an incredible standout showcase as Fiero, and is just exuding charisma for everything he's doing, and
from every orifice.
And really, the showcases are Ariana Grande Butera as Galinda and Cynthia Erivo, especially as Elphaba, and they're just phenomenal embodiments and kind of carrying on the lineage of these characters in a way, like we talked about when we did our kind of spoiler cast of the movie. Like, while I appreciate and respect the original Kristen Chenoweth and Idina Menzel performances, neither of those performers have ever really been like my favorites in the Broadway space. So I love that like this is a different interpretation of these characters and is phenomenal. It's similar to the cinematography of Dune and the big grandiose scale moments of Furiosa. I think this does that for Wicked, but in the musical sphere. In particular, the Ozdust Ballroom sequence is one of my absolute favorites of the year. The Dancing Through Life sequence in the library is incredible choreography, along with like just fun cinematographical moments. And then Defying Gravity is, absolutely a stunning, show closer for this. And it's why it's always the big, Act 1 closer. And they do a great job of translating that to the big screen for Cynthia Erivo's character. And so much of this, just like I have routinely had like the soundtrack playing on my phone as I've been doing write-ups or various other things, because it's just a delight, and I'm left so excited for where they go with Wicked for Good for the part 2 next year. It sucks that we have to wait a year for it, but like knowing the places that Act 2 of the musical goes and knowing some of the songs that we have to look forward to in part 2, I'm just going to be emotionally wrecked all over again next year. So, Wicked part 1 is my movie of the year. And Cam, I'll let you jump in with additional thoughts from your side.
Sure. Ditto to everything Trevor said already. If you really want to hear us dive deep into it, that episode of That Nerdy Site Show where we do a Wicked spoiler cast is... We go into we talk a lot about our own background in theater. People, I don't like a lot of times I think we spend so much time in the gaming or film space that people don't realize that Trevor and I both have a background as, Trevor and I have both done quote unquote professional acting. We've been paid actors. And both of us on stage. Trevor, much more like respectable than me in what he ended up doing in an opera house and whatnot. I did it on a smaller stage, but when it came to this movie, I wanted to avoid the opening weekend because I was afraid of every other time I've ever seen any other musical in a theater with a bunch of theater kids, of the sing-alongs that happen. And granted, a lot of those were at home, so they weren't in proper theaters. But I had a fear of that, and I'm I just don't want to deal with that. Also, I hadn't found work yet and was super depressed. And it was the holidays, and I wasn't able to buy anything for my family. and left me feeling like in a very strange mood. And then Trevor kind of tearing me out of that funk.
He's like, no, we're going to see this damn movie.
We're going to go see it. We saw it, and it was beyond phenomenal. It was one of the best. I mean, it's my number one pick of the year. Casting's perfect. Cinematography is perfect. Choreography is perfect.
It's another one that it like so much of it, while it has like a CG sheen to it in trailers and stuff, so much of it was practical, and you could see like so much behind the scenes of like, oh yeah, no, they really built out Shiz, or they really built out these big grandiose sets for Munchkinland or for the Wizard, the Oz.
Yeah, it's
the Emerald City. So
the Emerald City is beautiful, and it's as fantastical as beyond anything that you could imagine. And I think just especially one of the things I wanted to touch on is low point is Jeff Goldblum as the Wizard. And it's like, yes, but at the same time, it feels like that role was written for Jeff Goldblum. The fact is that the Wizard is a Jeff Goldblum character, and it is played to a T perfectly the way it needs to. The Wizard is traditionally, we talked about it on our spoiler cast, not a big singing role. It's really meant to be much more of like an honorary role for, Legends of Broadway or Legends of Theater in general. And so getting to see a Legend of the Silver Screen in Jeff Goldblum take on that role for this is perfect. Michelle Yeoh as Madame Morrible. Once again, like that one is, I think, singing wise, a little like not as great as I've seen on stage, but Michelle Yeoh brings a majesty and a presence to Madame Morrible that I have not seen on stage.
Yeah.
I see this as not as a sidekick to the Wizard, but a co-conspirator because of the presence Michelle Yeoh has in this.
Yeah, she definitely brings the gravitas to the sinister nature of the character when it's revealed.
Yep. Where before it's basically been like, oh, I'm the lovable teacher that everybody's gonna love, and like,
I say silly words
and stuff. And in this case, it's played so. There's just a touch of venom to everything she says and does, or like, I guess better way to put it, a touch of ice to everything she says and does. Like when she leaves a scene, there's a presence that somebody left. It's not, we're on to the next scene, or somebody left the room. It's, you feel a gap from her presence there. That's the level of gravitas she really pulls into this film. And so she's perfect for this role. Especially like the cues that we'll have paid off in Wicked for Good, is the touchstones on her ability to manipulate the weather. But also her touchstones on magic in general, and the way that she makes Elphaba's magic, despite the fact that it's a movie, feel special. Even though we're in a fantastical world, her reaction and her actions with Elphaba make her magic feel special. And the chemistry between the cast on all fronts is perfect. I cannot emphasize enough how wonderful this cast is and how great this movie is. It is just phenomenal. If you want a deeper dive, I think our spoiler cast goes way into every nick and cranny of this movie. So, yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to Wicked. So diving into our overall rankings,
Here we go.
I've gone through and tallied everything out. This is a very fascinating year.
Yeah, it is. I was going to say.
So there's a lot of ties. So I'm actually going to do a full top 20, because between the three of us, we had 20 movies that got like points on the board.
It's gotta be the most ever.
And there were no movies that all three of us had in our top 10.
I was just going to say, yeah.
There were like, we had, two of us had it in a top 10, and then it was an honorable mention for somebody or something like that. And there was a lot of like, two of us saw this, but not all three of us had any of these movies in our top 10.
Which I think is also the first time that's happened too.
Yeah, I believe so. Bringing up the rear at the end, at number 20, Mean Girls with my 1 point from my number 10. Number 19 with 2 points is Moana 2 from Cameron. A three-way tie at number 16 for If, Jim Henson Idea Man, and Snack Shack, with 3 points for each of those. Tilu 2 is number 15 with Logan's 4 points for that one. Number 14 with 5 points, music by John Williams from Cameron. We get to a three-way tie for number 11 with 6 points apiece. We have Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, We Live in Time, and Nosferatu. Number 9, a tie for number 9. This is largely why, because I was like, well, if I do a top 10, there isn't a number 10. We have a two-way tie at number 9. With 7 points apiece, Sonic the Hedgehog and the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Weird kind of like...
Weird pairing there.
Weird pairing, but at the same time, little interesting.
Perfect.
Sure. Number 8, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
Oh, yeah.
Go. With 8 points.
I'll take that.
Number 7, thanks to my number 2 ranking, The Wild Robot with 9 points.
Oh, man. Yeah.
A two-way tie for number 5, The Fall Guy. It's 10 points as the duo 5 rank from, or 6 rank rather, from both Logan and myself. And Logan's number 1 of Monkey Man is in there with 10 points. Number 4 with 2 contributions from both Cameron and myself, Deadpool and Wolverine with 13 points. Then we get a two-way tie for number 2 with Dune Part 2 at 16 and Inside Out 2 at 16.
Oh, interesting.
Basically, me and Logan championing Dune Part 2 and me and Cameron championing Inside Out. And then our number 1 movie of the year with 2 number 1 votes from both Cameron and I, Wicked Part 1 hits the top of our list. So yeah, those are our movies of the year. Another handful of movies there in our honorable mentions were Saturday Night, Beetlejuice, Gladiator 2, Argyle, and Challengers, and Borderlands. Challengers should be in here with 1 point. Why did it not? Did I?
So it would be tied with for 20 with Mean Girls.
Weirdly, maybe I just mistyped something in here, or I don't know. It'd be in there with Mean Girls. Did I misspell you, or I don't know. Maybe my calculation didn't pull in that number.
It's okay. We know it though.
Yeah. Anyway. So that's our overall list, and that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you, Logan and Cameron, for joining me for this big, epic movies of the year breakdown of things. We'll go around our metaphorical table with any plugs we might have. You can follow Logan. I don't know where you're at on social media these days, if you're on social media. I know you can follow Logan at Lefty Logie on Instagram.
That's true.
I don't know if you're around on the Blue Skies or if you're still doing anything out there on Twitter, but anything you want to give a shout out to or plug, Logan?
I will give a shout out to That D Plus show, where Trevor and Cameron have been talking about all the things on That D Plus. I wasn't able to make any of the Christmas time ones, but I'm sure they were excellent. In fact, I know they were, because I had a 10.5-hour flight from London and back that I would listen to his podcast on. So go listen to some of those as well.
There you go. I follow Cameron at revcabot.bsky.social. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Cam?
Yeah, I want to give a massive shout out to our Game of the Year podcast that went out last week. Trevor's write-up went up last week. Mine will be going up Monday with this podcast going up as well. And I'm sure Trevor's write-up for movies of the year is going to go up this next week.
I should have said that as well. I'm also planning to write a movie of the year top 10.
Yeah, I don't know. I never actually did get a write-up for my movies last year, and I don't really know if I'll do a movies write-up thing this year, because it's just, I'm like, apart from the conversation we had, I don't know if I can write about movies in the same way that I write about, video games or something like that.
Sure.
But yeah, you follow me at Trevor J. Starkey, and I will echo the shout-outs there to the written stuff that's going up on the site. I've got my top 20 games of the year. I do have a write-up somewhere in the works for my favorite platinum trophies of the year, as I historically do. I'll probably have a write-up for, my favorite little Lego sets, just little blurbs of those for 2024. And maybe we'll do something for movies, but definitely stay tuned for all that going up on thatnerdysite.com. You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. If you liked what you heard, once again, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you again for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.